All right, well, we'll get started. I was just chatting with my colleagues. I don't think we've gotten this many people to come out to a planning commission for a long time, so it's good to see the community come out to talk about zoning, such an exciting topic. So we're glad you're here. I mean, the point of tonight is a listening session, and so that's what this is all about. So I'll officially call to order the November 2nd, 2022 meeting of the City of Falls Church Planning Commission. Mr. Trainer, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Weiss?
Here.
Ms. Teets?
Here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Mr. Puentes?
Here.
Ms. Comont?
Here.
Mr. Hyra?
Here.
Mr. Krasner?
I am here.
We have a quorum.
All right, we have a full commission and a full house. Next order of business is to adopt tonight's agenda. As my fellow commissioners can see, the key item tonight is the work session, a public listening session on the T-zone zoning text amendment. Other than that, we just have a few perfunctory items, so if there's no comment on the agenda, I'll look for a motion to adopt the agenda as it was published.
Move to adopt?
Second.
Second, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we will proceed as published. We have no speaker series tonight. Any receipt of petitions, Mr. Stoddard or Mr. Trainer, for items not on our agenda? So is anyone here tonight to talk about something other than the T-zones? Just checking. Okay, then we will move right along. We only have one action item tonight, item 6A, which is adoption of our minutes from our last meeting on October 19th. Does anyone have any edits, corrections, comments on the minutes?
Move to adopt the minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Stevens.
I'll second.
Second, any discussion on that? All those in favor of adopting the minutes as they were prepared? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, those minutes are adopted. So that takes us, again, to the main event for tonight, and we won't waste any time. Item 7A, which is our work session on the T-zone zoning text amendment. And again, as I said, the point of tonight is a public listening session. This item was referred out to the Planning Commission by City Council. There have been several Planning Commission work sessions on this already. I think we've had 2 so far. Council had some meetings, and so, but the point of tonight, there were opportunities to speak at those meetings, but tonight really is geared towards listening to what the community has to say on the proposal. Before we get to public comment, we are going to have staff do an overview presentation to introduce the item. Some of this may be repetition for those who have been to other meetings or have seen some of the online materials, but we think it'll be helpful for those who haven't been to introduce what this proposal is all about before we go into the public comment. And so with that, is it Mr. Trainer who will be providing a presentation? Or Mr. Stoddard, you want to introduce the item first?
Yeah, if I could. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. Just to briefly introduce the item, as you said, the item for the Planning Commission tonight is to hold the public listening session for the very purpose you identified, which is to hear from the public, their thoughts and their reactions to the proposed language that's been referred out by council. Before we actually jump into Mr. Trainer's presentation, I do just want to sort of slide down in the staff report to talk about sort of where we are in the process. If we can go down to, I guess it's line 218. So this is as a reminder to the Commission, this is a schedule of events that have occurred to date, with City Council holding a series of work sessions in 2021 and 2022. It looks like 5 work sessions before considering first reading. And first reading really is the beginning of a wider public engagement process. They did refer the proposed text out to Planning Commission, Housing Commission, as well as the Environmental Sustainability Council. Those 3 groups have all met in work session to talk about the proposed text. In advance of tonight's listening session, we did put yard signs out along several of the T-zone's properties throughout the city, as well as put letters in the mail to both property owners as well as nearby property owners. And so really we are in the middle of that public engagement process. The various boards and commissions, as I said, have had a chance to discuss this.
Speak more slowly and a little bit more clearly.
Sure.
Thank you.
I can maybe move closer to the mic. Is this better? All right. I can start again. So this is this better for the folks in the back of the room if you raise your hands if you can hear me? All right. I saw a bunch. Okay. Well, that's good news. So just a reminder to the commission, these are the public sessions that have occurred to date regarding the proposed T-zone language. This began with a series of city council work sessions in 2021 as well as 2022. It was a total of 5 work sessions in which the council discussed this item before referring it out for first reading. And that first reading really is the start of the wider public engagement process. So when council referred it out, they sent it out specifically to 3 different advisory groups within the city, Planning Commission meeting here tonight, Housing Commission, and also the Environmental Sustainability Council. All 3 of those groups have met to discuss the item at least once, if not multiple times, as identified in this schedule. And then tonight, it is this public listening session where there is an opportunity for the public to come in and make their comments to the commission and inform your all's discussion on the proposed text. And this really marks sort of the middle of the public engagement process. The Planning Commission still has 2 full months of work ahead of it before it makes its recommendations back to City Council. And then the City Council will spend the first quarter of 2023 taking that advice from its boards and commissions as well as the general public and deciding whether they want to move forward with the language as they'd proposed or whether they want to make amendments to it before going out for more public engagement. So like I said, we're in the middle of the process, and Chair, I'll echo your point that it's wonderful to see members from the community coming in and making their voice heard about the future of the community and what they want to see in it. So I'm excited to see the number of folks that are here in the audience today, but I'll close my introduction there and turn it over to Mr. Trainer, who can provide a presentation on the contents of the material.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Good evening, Commissioners. As Mr. Stoddard mentioned, I'll be going over the proposed updates to the T-zone, transition zone zoning districts. And I'll start with the project background and why we're talking about T-zones. What are T-zones today? What are the proposed changes? Some environmental considerations, and then a recap at the end. So the background, as Mr. Stoddard mentioned, is in February 2021, City Council amended the special exception criteria, and as part of that action, Council requested planning staff to develop zoning tools to facilitate development of small residential projects and infill sites that are too small currently to support large commercial or mixed-use developments. T-zones were selected or thought to meet the task that Council put before staff as areas in the city that generally have experienced not as much investment as other parts of the city, resulting in a lack of aesthetics, streetscape, and infrastructure investment, as well as underperforming parts of community services. T-zone areas have also generally experienced development challenges or redevelopment challenges, where staff has received many requests to rezone T-zone properties to B1 in order to access the special exception process. So T-zones today make up less than 25 acres in the city, which is about 3% of the total land area in the city. See if I can zoom in on this map. Folks may have seen this map around town a little bit. These are all the properties in the city currently zoned T1 or T2. They generally congregate around the North Washington area and on Park Avenue, as well as a couple on South Washington Street, with a pocket on Hillwood Avenue, and on Roosevelt Street, the corner of Roosevelt and East Broad Street. Current allowable uses by right in both T1 and T2 include public buildings and churches, schools, daycare facilities, professional offices, group homes, residential institutions, parking lots, and mixed-use developments. The only difference today in the two districts is that T1 allows single and two-family residential uses by right, whereas T2 does not. This table shows the current building restrictions in T-zone sites. There's not too much of a difference here, but we'll get into what the proposed requirement, the proposed changes to these restrictions are in just a bit. So the summary of modifications that council referred out, these are what the proposed changes to the zoning districts are. The first is to consolidate T1 and T2 into a single transition zone district, removing single-family and two-family use as an allowable use, expanding commercial uses, expanding townhouse and multifamily uses, increase building height maximums, and expanding building lot coverage maximums to 80%. So now I'll talk a little bit more in depth about each proposed change. Then the first is district consolidation. As I said, the only difference today between the two districts is allowing single and two-family uses. This consolidation was recommended by the Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee, or ZOAC, in its final report before the committee dissolved on December 30th, 2010. The next is removing single-family and, again, two-family uses as allowable uses. And this was also recommended by ZOAC in its final report and is thought to enhance the transition aspect of what T-zones are thought to be, which is between single-family, low-intensity areas in the city and high-intensity commercial uses in the city. The next proposed change is expanding commercial uses. The full list of proposed expanded uses is this paragraph at the bottom, which I won't read in its entirety, but folks can access this presentation online where you can read these in your own time. But to talk generally about what the expanded commercial uses are is to expand neighborhood serving uses as by right allowances, and again, aid in this transition between low-intensity residential and high-intensity and density commercial areas in the city. Next is expanding townhouse and multifamily use. These proposed uses would come with a requirement of at least 10% of the project units going to affordable or workforce development. These projects would be limited to sites of 1 acre or less and would have to be approved by council through its special use permit process. The next thing I'll talk about is adjusting the building height and development restrictions on the lots. As proposed, the building height maximums would increase to the smaller 4 stories or 50 feet and would require upper level step backs adjacent to the residential districts R1A and R1B zones. As mentioned earlier, the maximum lot coverage as proposed would be 80% of the lot area. This is a massing graphic of 1 acre lots with what the proposed maximum development would allow on it. And even though I know that's a little difficult to grasp, but it shows what the step back would be here for abutting residential areas, as well as showing what an 80% maximum might look like. So the last items I'll talk about here are just some environmental considerations for stormwater. T-zones, as the proposed T-zone changes, don't currently have their own stormwater quantity or quality regulations. Instead, they would follow what the city's general requirements are, which are in the city code section 35.6. As well as I'll point out that there's no impervious surface maximums for T-zones, which is consistent with the code generally, except for the residential areas, which have their own impervious surface maximums. Similar story with urban forestry. T-zones would comply with existing urban forestry requirements generally in the city, including zoning district buffers, which are mandatory green space buffers between different zoning districts, and they vary depending on what the two zoning districts are. Currently, there's no proposed changes from the code on what off-street parking requirements are. They would follow what the city's general guidance is. Understand that council currently it's in their work plan to possibly review what the off-street parking requirements are across zoning districts, and so T-zones would be affected by that should any changes be made. So again, to recap quickly, why T-zones? T-zones are meant to serve as transition areas in the city between low density and intensity residential areas and more vibrant commercial areas. The proposed changes are thought to provide pathways for reinvestment to improve the aesthetics, streetscape, and infrastructure, as well as additional community services for these areas. And one last time, the proposed changes to the T-zone districts are to consolidate T1 and T2 into a single transition zone district, to remove single-family and two-family uses as by right allowable uses, expanding commercial uses, expanding townhouse and multifamily uses, as well as increasing building height maximums and expanding lot coverage maximums to 80%. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trainer. Well, I mean, as the name of tonight implies, it's a night to listen to the community. It's not a night for us to make any decisions. There are going to be more opportunities for us to discuss it. There will be more opportunities for public comment as well. When we formally take up the item, there'll be at least one more work session and a public hearing scheduled tentatively at this point for December. But tonight is all about listening to public comment. And given the large number of people that are here, we're going to have to stick to our normal rules, which are 3 minutes a person. We'll go by the speaker slips. Mr. Stoddard will call your name. If you haven't filled out a speaker slip, at the end you can still speak. Anyone who's here tonight can speak, but we'll go with the people who filled out slips first. There is a little system there, like a traffic light, right, with on the top of the podium there for red and green. So it'll be green to give you your 3 minutes, and when your red light comes on, if you could sum up at that point and conclude your comments so that we can listen to everybody, considering the number of people that are here tonight to provide their input. And so with that, without further ado, I guess we'll get started. And Mr. Trainer, would you call the first speaker?
I will, and I just want to add to that, Mr. Chair, that I believe the yellow light turns on when you have about 20 seconds left, so
okay.
that might be your cue to kind of summarize
Just like a
your
traffic
comments.
light. And also just so people know, if anyone needs a restroom, this building can be a little confusing. The restrooms are actually out in the hall and down the stairs, if you're looking for that. And there, of course, there are emergency exits. Well, emergency exit behind you, and of course the way you came in. And with that, I guess we'll get started.
Okay. Our first speaker is Allison Brown. And next up will be Justine Underwell.
Oh, and if you could also, when you speak, just give your name and your address, and then go ahead and you'll have your 3 minutes.
I'm Allison Brown, 706 Poplar Drive. I've lived in the City of Falls Church for over 17 years, and I'm here to support the proposed changes to the T-zone zoning. Especially, we need more housing in the City of Falls Church, and we need more townhouses and multifamily housing in particular. We need options for people who don't want to live in a single-family house or can't afford a single-family house, and most of the land in City of Falls Church is zoned exclusively for single-family homes. So it's really important for the Planning Commission and City Council to make zoning more flexible so that we can have more housing options, especially townhomes and multifamily. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Justine Underhill. After Justine is Jimmy Jung.
Great, thank you. Hi, my name is Justine Underhill, and I'm at 513 Greenwich Street. I would like to voice my support for the current T-zone plan, especially the specific fact that the current plan requires 10% affordable housing. We have a severe shortage of affordable housing here in Falls Church, and we have a need to meet the missing middle of housing here. And so I would just like to, again, voice my support for this plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jimmy Jung, 203 North Lee Street. And in the email thread that went around our neighborhood, there was a discussion about housing. And I am for housing, but it's the expansion of commercial, the increased development, those are the ones that trouble me. In the notice for this meeting, we were told that what the problems you guys were trying to solve were limited development activity observed in T zones compared to commercial, and the common practice of requesting special exceptions to the process. You guys have identified those as problems you're trying to solve. Those are not problems. That's exactly what should be happening in a transition zone. We should not see development that measures up to the commercial development. That's not our goal. A transition of a four-story building that comes right up to the street that covers 80% is not a transition. A single-family home, if someone chooses to put one there, is a transition from the business to there. I find it hard to believe that the two beautiful homes that went up across the street from the library would not be allowed in a T-zone. Instead, but a spectrum could go straight in, something as tall as that. When we talk about reinvestment, I really think we're talking about development. Also, when I look at the map, you know, we're pointing at things that are really churches and things like that, things that really aren't going to be impacted by this change. The folks over at Columbia Baptist are not going to start building small homes in their backyard. I think we're very focused on, the way it looks to me, quite frankly, a little bit of Park Avenue, where I think if you guys are looking to do as much development as you can in the city, okay, fine. But why there? I mean, we have empty space for business that is not being used currently. We have the 900 block where, I don't know, I think of the 900 block because I loved hole-in-the-wall books, and it disappeared, waiting for somebody to build something tall there, because that's where it belongs. But not on Park Avenue. You guys are trying to make that into a great street. And I don't see that going on with these kind of proposals. We have lots of room for lots of housing, and diverse housing. But this seems so incredibly focused on these teeny tiny little areas. I'm not sure that's what you're going to achieve out of this. I could blather on for a bit, but I already got a yellow light, so I'm going to step back. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Next is Kent Finnerty. And next, after Kent, is Joseph Chiarizi.
Hey, my name's Kent Finnerty. I own a property on 258 North Washington, and we were working on prelim plans to make the best use of the T-zoning. So it was going to be either a 10 or 11 room inn by right, which is admittedly a little bit weird, kind of a compromise. So I think given what's nearby, these zoning changes for the suggested areas make a lot of sense, and they are going to allow more options. So it seems like, given the surrounding areas and what's being built, multifamily and maybe even mixed use could make a lot more sense for working with what's already there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Joseph Chiarizi.
Good evening. I'm Joseph Shirizzi, Chair of the Environmental Sustainability Council. I live on Gundry Drive in a beautiful row house that is currently illegal to build in more than 75% of the residential area in Falls Church. The ESC is strongly in support of the T-zone amendments and changes, with an asterisk that we believe you should take into account all the things that we make comments on other developments, on larger developments, including electrification, increasing density, less parking spaces requirements, maintaining existing tree cover or better, maintaining existing rainwater runoff levels or better. And there's no reason that we can't have every item on our wish list if we remove parking minimums. Below ground parking costs $50,000 per parking space to build around in this area and if we lowered our requirements a little bit, then it would make all sorts of affordable housing, sustainable development, and really equitable development in the city possible and profitable for developers to do so. Personally, I'm very strongly in support of increasing density at every level. In terms of environmental impact, the more people that can live closer together and meet their daily needs without driving for an hour to get to a grocery store or whatever else that you need to get to, the more that we can meet our needs in our neighborhoods, walking, biking, and otherwise, the more sustainable our society will be. And there's been a couple of people that have, several people that have really asked that, hey, is it the environmentally friendly thing to do to cut down a tree and build a bunch of apartments? Is it environmentally friendly to build more apartments and build more things? Or should we maintain, parking lots and a couple strips of grass that are in a lot of these T-zones right now? And it's absolutely undeniably better in terms of environmental development by orders of magnitude to build more density, to increase density in Falls Church, especially around areas where we have excellent transit. Strongly in support of mixed-use development, of allowing things that help us meet our daily needs like bakeries and the other suggested items on the list for the types of really gentle density and really gentle neighborhood services that are allowed in T-zones. I think that's extremely well thought out and definitely support that. We've been underbuilding housing for decades in this country. We're not meeting our needs. The townhouse that I live in right now was sold in 1990 for $120,000. This year, the ones next door and across the street are selling for $800,000. Incomes have not risen for working class families at even half or a fourth of the rate of housing increasing in this area. Public school teachers used to be able to afford to live in Falls Church without subsidies, and now they can't, and that's unacceptable to me. Please support density and affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Cynthia Garner. And then Justin Berg.
Good evening. My name is Cynthia Garner. My spouse and I live at 219 East Columbia Street. There may be people who won't like what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I recognize that the Planning Commission, the process and the zoning code are intended to provide a measure of predictability and control over land use, and they necessitate balancing competing goals. I've reviewed the staff report and the attachments, and I've got 3 points that are specifically relevant to the T-zones. I think the 80% coverage that is being proposed and the absence of setbacks where the T-zones abut to low-density residential will not be a transition at all. I think an 80% coverage doesn't constitute a transition. It is going to loom over the houses that are next to it. And that's may not be the case where it is not immediately adjacent to a low-density residential zone. So there are pieces of the T-zone that will have that impact. And I think, honestly, that putting a higher massing and a higher building next to those zones really doesn't create a transition. It just pushes the dense development up against the edge of the residential. This issue is potentially of more consequence When you combine it with looking at the comprehensive plan, where a number of land parcels that are not currently zoned as T-zones, but are identified as potentially rezoned to be T-zones, all of a sudden it opens up other places and other neighborhoods that may be looking at much higher density immediately next to residential areas. So this is not just what's going to happen to T-zones. It's also going to happen, if you change the code, it's going to perpetuate and will apply to other places that are not yet identified as T-zones. Further residential variety in Falls Church is a positive goal. It absolutely needs to be done. And I support the Planning Commission's attempts to do that and the city's purpose in doing that. But I don't think, the question is, how can we accomplish multiple somewhat competing goals without sacrificing one for the other? And that's the planning process. The status of current single-family homes that are in T-zones is also an issue because, for example, the Madison homes on Park Avenue, which are currently single-family residences, if you take away the by right use for existing single-family homes in those zones, you've made them non-compliant with a code. And you need to create an exception for houses that are currently single-family residences that are in those zones. Otherwise, you're creating another problem. And the affordability, absolutely crucial, but we are competing with a lot of other jurisdictions. And on November 15th, when the Silver Line to Loudoun County opens up, people who can telework, who can distance work, will look for less expensive places to buy and transit. So I think I'm not quite out of time yet. Okay, you'll have to listen to me blather a little more. Two very quick comments. Looking at the comprehensive plan document, not directly on the T-zones, I noticed that Mr. Brown's Park is not listed on the comprehensive plan. Maybe someone can take a look at the comprehensive document and make sure Mr. Brown's Park is still identified. It's a wonderful little perfect green space right on Broad Street, and that whole area on the comprehensive map is shown for mixed use. And we'd hate to lose that wonderful little park. And separately, on the ZOAC final report, they highly recommended that the HARB review become mandatory review. I completely agree with that recommendation. The advisory nature of that review has not done as strong a job as it could have on those houses. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next is Justin Berg. We prefer that one,
Yeah,
if you can.
that one's got the light.
Hi, first off, just thank you guys for taking the time to really listen and for doing all this outreach to the community. I really appreciate all the work that's gone into making sure we all could come out and say our piece. In general, I think this is a well thought out idea. We're on the right track. I do just want to flag a couple of little things to think about as you continue to debate and consider. First off, a lot of the T-zone, I live on 202 Garden Court, so right across from Columbia Baptist Church. A big chunk of the T-zones are actually churches, and so I'm trying to figure out why we're going through so much effort here for what might actually be a relatively small amount of properties, unless we're thinking about, the churches maybe moving on, which then, makes me wonder what would go in place of Columbia Baptist if that were ever to move on, although I think that's unlikely given the level of investment that they're making right now. And then the other thing is when you're changing zoning, you should be looking at the current by right uses. And if we're going through the effort and spending the time to do this, I noticed, it jumped out that one of the by right uses in the proposal is to continue to be parking. I don't think we want to use the T-zones for parking lots. And so if the whole thing is opened up and you're really looking at, how we can maximize these spaces, having a big list of by right uses may result in the kind of development that you don't actually want to have. And so would suggest really looking at what will be permitted by right if this goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Hans Sheffield. And after them, Pat Aburano.
Hi, I just wanted to also thank you all for the opportunity to provide comments. So my name is Hans Scheifele. I live adjacent to a property currently in a transitional zone at 114 East Columbia Street. I'm opposed to changes such as these that would reduce the important limitations to provide a buffer between high-density commercial development and small single-family homes. I believe the current T-zone restrictions in place, again, they provide an important buffer and are necessary to preserve the character of our city. And they're also, I think, important to protect public health and safety. I know for me, recent development has resulted in more traffic on my street, including cars that have been clocked at over 70 miles per hour. Also, some recent accidents on my street. And so I think that the T-zones do provide an important buffer, and I think they do protect our neighborhoods. And so I'm not in support of making any changes. I think the factors that motivated the city to put these protections in place initially are still relevant, and I think are actually more relevant today than they were back when these were created. I think we continue to see more development. I do support development. You know, I support more affordable housing. What I don't support is changing, you know, the nature and the character of the entire city for the sake of development. And I think that these zones are an important protection and should be maintained. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to comment.
I'm Pat Albarano. I live at the Broadway at 502 West Broad, and my husband and I have a condominium there that is on the back of the building, so it abuts where the T-zone property is that goes along Lee Park in Pennsylvania. And right now, it's very leafy, it's very residential feeling, even though there are small businesses in some of the smaller, older homes on that T-zone lot. If it were to go develop to 80% of the lot, I mean, we would be looking at a four-story wall potentially 10 feet from the property line. I mean, there are, I think, at least a dozen residences on the back of the Broadway. These are our homes. I don't know that anyone in a family home would want to have, especially since you've bought looking, you know, based on the lovely view and the quiet aspect of the back of the building, to be looking then at later development after purchase of your own unit of a four-story wall 10 feet from the edge of your property line. I mean, just to think about that. As it currently stands between the Broadway back property line and the T-zone area, there are huge, beautiful, tall trees. They look quite healthy. They provide a great canopy. I imagine it helps also with stormwater drainage, but it would be a shame that we would potentially lose those trees. And according to the city website, it seems that preserving the canopy and the trees in the city is a big goal and purpose. So anyway, thank you for listening.
Sure. Thank you.
Brian Aburano, followed by Ellen Gross.
Thank you again for allowing us to speak with our concerns. As my wife just said, we live in the Broadway, and our unit faces one of the T-zones between the Broadway and Park Avenue. And we get most of the light and most of our air and most of our views from that side of the building. And if there is put up a building that would be 80% coverage, 4 stories, within 10 feet of the line of the property, we would cease to have anything there. We'd be facing a building. We might as well be living in Roslyn, which we did consider, but we wanted something greener and nicer, and that's why we moved here. I think well, I can't speak to the other T-zones. I think the T-zones along Park Avenue are kind of in my mind, more of a street that is tree-lined, it's residential, low-rise residential properties with a school, a church, some of the other public buildings. And the only two exceptions are Founders Row and the Spectrum, which quite frankly, in my mind, are out of character with that street. And I think it is important, as Mr. Jung mentioned, that Park Avenue has a certain character of a neighborhood, and it was a place that attracted us because of its nature and quality. And there are, as Mr. Jung also said, other places to put high-density commercial or condominium-type properties in Falls Church along Broad Avenue and other places. And why you would put it in Park Avenue, which is a place which I said has a very nice character, is quite frankly beyond me. And I've seen a number of communities, not just in Virginia, that have grown and they put in one new development after another. In fact, we were just in Bellevue, Washington, where I grew up nearby. It was a nice, small, charming community. And now it is practically like downtown Seattle. And to me, it's lost all of the character and meaning that it used to have. And I think that's the problem with commercial development, is that people want to expand it to the maximum. And it's the job of the Planning Commission and City Council to take a look at it and try to preserve what makes this community what it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ellen Gross.
Ellen Gross, 303 Lincoln Avenue. I'm speaking for myself and 4 other people. We, the undersigned, wish to add our voices to those opposing the proposed changes to T1, T2 transition zones. We live in various areas of the city, in both single-family homes and apartment buildings. Each of us has lived in the city for approximately 50 years. We oppose the T-zone changes because they represent a radical, negative departure from the current zoning regulations that provide important protections to Falls Church residents across all neighborhoods and housing types. Doubling the size of allowable lot coverage, raising height limits, and reducing required setbacks of neighboring properties, as these new regulations do, negatively affect privacy, quiet, and green space. In fact, the narrowing of space between construction and the street or a neighboring property may make it impossible to plant or grow trees in many areas. Will Falls Church still be a recognized Tree City USA? These regulations effectively eliminate the transition zone. A 50-foot-tall building on 80% of a lot within 10 feet of its neighbors is hardly transitional, so that there is no longer a buffer between commercial and residential areas. City residents have relied on that buffer for many, many years. It has been argued that increasing the density of available housing will meet the needs of middle-income residents. However, we are not aware of any data the Council has provided demonstrating that the housing built in these T-zones will be within the budgets of middle-income buyers and renters. Finally, when people purchase a home of whatever type in our city, they rely on the existing zoning regulations. When those regulations are changed in ways that have serious negative impacts on those people, a basic question of fairness arises. Before you take action on this issue, we hope you will consider these impacts very carefully and reject the proposed changes. Sincerely, Ellen Gross, former member and vice chairman of the Falls Church City School Board, former president of the Falls Church League of Women Voters. Jane Scully, former member of the Falls Church City Council, former member and chairman of the Falls Church City School Board. Sally Phillips, former member and chairman of the Falls Church City Planning Commission, former president of the League of Women Voters, former president of Citizens for a Better City. Martha Meserve, former member and vice chairman of the Falls Church City Council, former member and chairman of the Falls Church Planning Commission, former member and chairman of the Falls Church Economic Development Authority, and Ellen Salisbury, former member and chairman of the Falls Church City School Board, former president of the Falls Church League of Women Voters. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Leanne Hall, followed by Lauren Thomas.
How do I know when it starts?
Yep, there you go.
So thank you for hearing us tonight. I hope our words will be considered and weighed carefully by all who hear them. I'm a homeowner in an historic property. I've served on the Historic Commission, and I am next to a T1 zone property. And I was shocked to just hear about all of this recently, and shocked to learn that this has been going on behind the scenes for over a year, almost a year and a half. And we're just clued in this week. A lot of people just got a letter yesterday. And all the time I've lived here,
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I want to hear what you're saying.
Just-
And all the time I've
yes, there you
lived
go.
here,
Thank you very much.
I have not seen this short of a notice from the Planning Commission for the residents. To allow it to be zoned commercial should alarm all the citizens of Falls Church. Where are the buffers for the residents, for the citizens? Where are the buffers? The whole city of Falls Church has been declared an historic district. To open the door to such an amount of development would be a major change, or could be a major change in the landscape of the city, and an invasion into the lives of private citizens. Traffic, privacy, and safety issues are some of the concerns. Falls Church is a jewel in Northern Virginia because it is not a concrete jungle. So this is why many families like to move here and want to be here, because it's unique in this area. And my home is number 36 in architecture, city, on the city register of historic homes. And I would just be horrified to have something slapped up next to me that went that high and 10 feet from my property, with windows staring down onto our property. It's not a good feeling, and I don't think anyone here would want to be in that situation.
Your red light is on, if you could just sum up.
And also, if anyone has property that they want to develop in a T-zone, they shouldn't be able to give input if they're part of the decision-making. It's a conflict of interest. So that's it.
Thank you.
Lauren Thomas, and then Marty Mayer.
Thank you. I am a resident at 310 Lawton Street.
Sorry.
And we can proudly say in our family, we have 3 generations living here currently in the little city. We were drawn back here, never imagining we'd return as adults because of the leafiness, the walkability, and the charm. We live we're 1 block away from 2 T-zone lots. We support the council's wish to provide townhouses for smaller family units for single occupancy use, but we reject this current plan, I'm speaking for my family, with a doubling of 80% coverage and the loss of setbacks. The T-zones were adopted for all the good reasons that have already been expressed by community members tonight, and thank you to everyone for being here. This is a sacrifice that we're making for the betterment of our city. The Planning Commission has a comprehensive vision to keep in mind. Increase the city's protected natural areas to provide habitat and tree canopy, decrease stormwater runoff, which is a big problem in this town. The proposed changes contradict that vision. We fear that this pro-development council has lost sight of what current residents want, a quiet lifestyle in the little city. Founders Row does not support and improve the aesthetics of our town with its hulking scale and empty storefronts, nor does the Mammoth Broad and Washington development with negligible buffer between it and Lawton Street. We have had to negotiate and fight to maintain the character of our street, one of the streets that draws people to this town. Safety. A traffic calming study currently done clocked people at 70. Hans referenced that. My son's classmate was struck by a car on Broad and has still not returned from school. That happened last December. Instead of pushing for more and more development, can we not improve the quality of life given what we're faced with already? More residents, higher density means less safety, more cars. And then there are some council members who have floated the notion that parking requirements could be waived because there is ample street parking. I would encourage them to show us where on the map they envision those cars parking. Pretty sure it is our street. The Planning Commission's T-zone examples of regional projects are not applicable in our situation. One of them is on the Potomac River. That's a very lovely natural buffer. The other, it backs onto Route 1. I'm talking about these two here. I do not view these as comparables. In conclusion, we call on you to maintain the character of our small town. That is in the comprehensive plan, and that is the work before us. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out.
Marty Mayer, and then Aaron Flynn.
Hello, my name is Marty Marr, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Planning Commission. I'm a resident of the Broadway at 502 West Broad Street. My condo looks back towards Park Avenue, as does the apartment of some others. We came to Falls Church from Arlington. We lived in Arlington for 37 years and saw it become an urban village. It is not the Arlington that we moved to 37 years ago. And I fear that the same will happen to Falls Church if this kind of change in T-zones is permitted to happen. We came to Falls Church because it has leafy streets, it has a sense of community, it's a safe community, and it has diverse types of residents. But building a 4-story apartment building 10 feet from our building would be out of character with Falls Church. I'd be very sad to see it change. In summary, I'd like to say that as on the Planning Commission, you have a responsibility and an opportunity to make a difference in the quality of life of those who live in Falls Church. We hope you will consider all these things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron Flynn, and then Charlie Lord.
Good evening. I'm Marion Flynn. I live at 222 Little Falls Street in the Governor Square Townhomes. I first want to thank the Planning Commission for the opportunity to comment. I'm frustrated, like others, that this is the first real formal effort to engage the community and public on T-zones, despite City Council and the planning staff giving attention to this issue for over a year and their efforts to solicit feedback actively from developers. By contrast, the Commission and the public's input on T-zones feels rushed, especially given the complexity of the changes and the sensitive roles that these parcels play as a buffer between commercial and residential areas. The parcels, though only 3% of land, are in prime locations and deserving of much thought and deliberation as to how each lot is developed and its best use relative to other lots in the surrounding area. For that reason, I agree with the commissioners who have opined thus far that T-zones may be better dealt with on a parcel-by-parcel or block-by-block basis. As to the proposed amendments, I'm struck by the lack of tailoring. I don't take issue with eliminating by right single-family use and increasing the diversity of housing stock, especially as to condos and townhomes, which are lacking from much of the larger ongoing development projects. And I support creating affordable housing, although I don't see how these amendments accomplish that without thinking more creatively about financing such projects, which it's within the city's power to do if it really values increasing affordability. So I question the way the amendments are structured with expansive by-right commercial development if one of the stated purposes is to increase the diversity of our housing stock. Beyond that, like others, I'm concerned about 80% build-outs, increased height allowances, and reduced setbacks. That combination eliminates green space and shade trees and obliterates any true buffer zone between lots or uses. Even as to commercial use, the change in land value that results from proposed zoning amendments would seem to favor big development over neighborhood-serving businesses like Northside Social, or like those businesses typically found on Church Street in downtown Vienna, for example. Big by-right development and architecture that isn't properly scaled for pedestrians along Great Falls Street, Maple, and Park in particular also cut against the city's desire for more bikeable and walkable streets. I'd note 431 and 433 Park, which are the back of the spectrum, on Park as you approach Pennsylvania as an example of the negative pedestrian experience that results from the combination of sizable height and reduced setbacks. At bottom, my concern is that this calls for big changes to the zoning code without any guarantee of what it is we're getting in exchange or real appreciation for the downsides for the city as a whole of increased building footprints and expansive by-right development. I also fear that these changes, which are of the city's own making, reflect that our true values are the almighty dollar and extreme consumerism, and not ones related to environmental stewardship or the creation of more equitable housing. And so I encourage the Commission to continue to ask the hard questions about why we're doing this, what we're getting in exchange, and whether we've appropriately balanced the cost and benefits of these changes, which at this point I don't think are reflected in the proposed amendments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie Lord, then Mary Chavez.
Good evening. My name is Charlie Lord. I live at 222 Little Falls Street. As the previous speaker, it's true with the previous speaker, I'm a third-generation Falls Churcher. My parents live on Great Falls Street. They are opposed to this proposed amendment, for the record. Yes, all right. My parents live on Great Falls. They're opposed. They're not here, but they're opposed to this amendment. We're a third generation. We have a 5-year-old, so we're thinking not only of the past of Falls Church, the present, but the future of Falls Church. What kind of place it's been for us to grow up in as a family. It has all the attributes that many of these speakers in opposition tonight have stated. Its leafiness, its small-town community, and what a broad-stroke development like this might do to a community like this. You have, well, the city says it's only 3% of the land. By definition, these are transition zones. These are some of the most sensitive parcels of land in the city, those that are deserving the most careful consideration before you would just by right allow such large development. So I share many of the concerns that have already been provided. I echo the concern about this is a failure to focus on dedicated affordable housing buildings, which other jurisdictions that surround us have been able to do through a combination of financing, affordable housing tax breaks. If what we want is affordable housing, then let's do it, and let's not be begging some percentage off of market rate large-scale developments, which is completely out of scale with the city. So I had a number of points I wanted to talk about. I don't know what I'll get to. I'm glad people touched on historic preservation. There are 4 commercial structures that were built between 1870 and 1891 within T-zones. The minute that this change takes effect, the values of the land that they sit on would go way up. And in this city, the only way you can tear down a historic property is if you make the market rate so high that would-be buyers who want to continue to have that use are no longer going to be able to afford it. And then the developer can come in, for instance, to 258 North Washington. The owner here was here earlier saying maybe it's time for multifamily. They could come in and say it's no longer, we can't find a bona fide purchaser who will keep it. I want to comment definitely on the procedural changes that are buried in this provision. What gets the most amount of attention is the height of the buildings, the footprint, but the procedural aspect of this code, when you read it, this is the city voluntarily relinquishing its regulatory powers. There's something wrong with this picture. If you compare the process that would occur if a property owner wished to build a non-conforming use and go through special exceptions, the code quite appropriately requires detailed application materials that cover a full range of matters within public concern. And then it's mandatory public comment, and mandatory planning commission review. Further rounds of public comment, all of which is appropriate because we don't live in some suburban sprawl that needs to be retrofitted. We're not some green field. We're an established community. There's a problem when the city is voluntarily getting rid of its important regulatory powers. Thank you.
Mayor Chavez, and then Genevieve Ondar.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Mary Chavez. I live at 215 Lawton Street. I back onto a T-zone. Let's call a spade a spade. First, City Council zoning changes for transitional lots would not improve them. They would eliminate them, effectively converting the T-zones to commercial zones with mere B1 heights and B2 density. Second, the council's proposals reflect a solution in search of a rationale. Last year, Economic Development Committee members expressed concern that large mixed-use development projects could peter out. They decided to focus on small infill projects, particularly small condos, for continuing development. From there, diversity in housing, the missing middle, and neighborhood-serving retail became a constantly changing target to justify rezoning a few T-lots on Park Avenue. Subsequently, other council members pressed to include all city T-lots, whether there was logic in redeveloping all of them or not. Third, let's face it, the proposed changes will do little for affordable or middle housing. Nothing prevents developers from selling most units at luxury rates. We would do better for middle housing to simply allow duplexes, quads, and sixplexes within current T-lot guidelines. Fourth, despite the early emphasis on residential housing, the changes also would permit large commercial buildings by right with no city review for attractive architecture, neighborhood compatibility, tree canopy, or green space. We would have no idea what the result of these general code changes would be. Fifth, T-lots traditionally have been rezoned as part of special exception applications for mixed-use projects. Now we have a proposal rezoning of all city T-lots by council fiat, with no applications in hand and no negotiated city benefits. This makes no sense. In short, the Planning Commission should strongly oppose the zoning changes proposed by council. We shouldn't start down a path of development for development's sake or to benefit a specific developer. Thank you.
Genevieve Ondar, and then Ellen Salisbury.
Hi, I'm Genevieve Udar. I really want to express gratitude to all of you. I'm sure this is a very long night, and all of my citizens here who've spoken so eloquently, so I want to take the bar and kind of bring that down a little bit as I go on record, expressing concern for, as has been mentioned a few times, the scale and intensity of the proposed changes. The significant increases to coverage, building height, and significant reduction in setbacks. I do, for the record, live at 213 Lawton Street, right next to Mary, right behind one of the T-zones. These changes seem to contradict the inherent goal of a transition. While the ideal hope for many of us is that these changes will create opportunities for townhouses, duplex, and other housing diversity, my fear is that removing, as another gentleman had spoken of, removing some of the city's role here and making a lot of these things by right, treating all T-zones as one, that we would not prohibit a commercial developer from maximizing their development to the fullest extent that we enable, further contributing to shifting our city from a city of trees and thoughtful architecture to a collection of concrete buildings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ellen Salisbury, and then Nancy Kamers.
Good evening. I'm Ellen Salisbury. I'm a resident of the Broadway, and what I'd like to do is just ask my fellow Broadway residents by a show of hand to let you know how many of us are here and how many of us are interested in what happens, not just to Park Avenue, but to these T-zone parcels throughout the city. I've lived in Falls Church a really long time, and I've seen many changes, and I've seen over the years how much more aware the community is of the importance of the environment to the benefit of the citizens. And I'm not going to get into the weeds of all, I'm not going to get into the weeds of all the details of and specifics of what the proposals show, but I think we're talking about changes that affect not only the way the city looks, but also the way that we as citizens are going to be able to react to those changes. I don't want to see buildings that cover large portions of the property subject to zoning requirements, and I don't want to lose the trees that make this city so livable. Even though my apartment faces Broad Street and I'm in the middle of downtown Falls Church, I'm able to enjoy the beauty of the trees in the Howard Herman Park directly across from my windows, and I can enjoy the street trees on Broad Street. What I'm most concerned about is the fact that the changes will affect the tree cover of the city and the amount of green space that we're able to enjoy. Now, I see that in the presentation tonight you mentioned the Urban Forestry Commission. I understand that so far the Urban Forestry Commission and the city arborist have not been contacted to comment on this proposal, and surely that's something that should happen in this process. There's no reason why changes can't accommodate the concept of retaining as many trees and green space as possible. We've seen firsthand what a cleared lot with a mega mansion looks like, but we've also seen how thoughtful design has created a landscape that's functional and pleasing. As you remember, there was much discussion about how to manage the parking deck of the Hilton Gardens Hotel on the Park Avenue side. If you walk past that now, you see trees that screen the garage and a bench for people to enjoy. There's no reason that that result was so hard to accomplish. I think that that sort of thinking is what needs to be done. So what I'm asking you to consider is this, that a thoughtful approach be taken so that what makes Falls Church livable is maintained, and that a commitment to thoughtful requirements will continue to make Falls Church an oasis in the middle of this dense development. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Nancy Kamens, and my husband and I live at the Broadway, and we've been here 7 years. And we moved from Arlington. Things were coming up on all sides of our house, tall buildings, new buildings. We didn't like it. I'm a nature person, and I was thrilled to be here where I could be in the middle of the city at the front of our building, and then our big windows look out on the courtyard and north towards Park Street. And that's my view. That's my whole view. And that's what I look at from my living room. And I'm pretty sure that I would suffer greatly if I had to look at a brick wall that was 10 feet from our property. I don't think I could do it. I think I'd have to move, which I never thought I would say. But my quality of life would be so reduced that I couldn't do it. And it's not what we came to. We moved here because of the ideal ambiance and the quality of life. So I feel pretty passionately about, yes, have some development, but not 80% of the property and 10 feet from our property line. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandy Mitchell, and then Peggy Finarelli.
Well, hello, my name is Sandy Mitchell. I too live at the Broadway, on the northwest corner of the Broadway, basically at the corner of Park and Lee. My husband and I decided we wanted to move to, excuse me, Falls Church City, and there was only one apartment available in the Broadway, which was where friends of ours lived, and we decided we wanted to live there. And I said, oh gosh, only one. I don't even want to go see. We'll have no choice. So my husband said, let's go. We went. We stood in this living room, looked out toward Park Street, and we could see trees. We could see trees from the balcony, from the bedroom, from the kitchen, from the dining room, and from the living room. We overpaid. And we love it. As a longtime gardener, once we moved in, the trees became my friends. And they sway in the winds, they predict the rain, and I just look to them all the time. You wouldn't believe it, but I really stand there and look out at the trees. It's just beautiful. Before we bought, though, we saw the church and a house and parking areas next to the building, and we checked the zoning and realized it was a transition zone. We were aware that there were some height restrictions and less than half of the lot could be covered by a building. And so we thought there'll be some city oversight. City will protect us, and that land will probably be developed, and that'll be okay. But now, if this type of zoning change happens, there'll be far less oversight, and we would expect that builders would tend toward maximum allowances on a piece of land for maximum profits, which makes sense. And that maximum is 80%, as many of us have mentioned. The livability of my home could be decreased, my quality of life and character of how I feel in my home could be lowered, and not seeing trees would make me really unhappy. Since I would be facing the back of a building, there could be someone looking into my home from as little as 10 feet away. That just seems outrageous to me. In the notes from the January 18th meeting on this transition zone topic, it says that there is, quote, no direct fiscal impact for making these amendments to the zoning code. That's for the city, unquote. So there may be no fiscal impact to the city. Oh, are we on red? I'm just.
If you could just sum up, yeah, your red light came on.
Okay, there may be no fiscal impact to the city, but a building near maximum would lower the value of not only my home, but of the 78 other units in the Broadway. Will our assessment and taxes be lowered? And lastly, I heard lots of conversation about missing middle, affordable housing, but it seems likely to me that with no stated goals and with minimal requirements for building, what we will get is more expensive multifamily housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peggy Finarelli, followed by Diane DeMauro.
Hi, I'm Peggy Finarelli. I also, like many other people tonight, live in the Broadway. Thank you very much for listening to us this evening. It's a long night. We all appreciate it. Most of us moved into Falls Church City because it's special. We all know that. It's a lovely little place, a respite nestled amongst other more developed areas like Arlington, like the district, like Tyson's. We liked that commercial development was concentrated largely on Broad Street and Lee Highway, the two big streets that are running through town, as we all know. And this left a homogeneous, largely residential village that was safe for our children to play and safe for us to walk around. Small streets, minimal through traffic, parking adequate for the community's needs. Now we're confronted with a development proposal to create these transition zones, providing by right approval for 50-foot high buildings, 10-foot setbacks from the property lines. I don't need to go through all this again. But these are not smooth transitions between one thing and another. Instead, these represent a dramatic expansion of the highly developed, highly trafficked Broad Street and Lee Highway venues into the new, into currently quieter areas of the city. We all understand that commercial development can bring greater tax revenues to the city's coffers, but at what cost? Do we want Park Avenue to end up a second Broad Street, reaching further into the city's residential areas? Because I fear that's what we're talking about. And after that, after Broad Street, after Park Avenue goes, then what's next? Because it just makes sense that this would go further. This is a slippery slope leading to an absolutely fundamental change in the character of Falls Church City. Let's make no mistake here. The current concept of transition zone is a euphemism for urban sprawl.
Hi, my name is Diane DeMayo. I live with my husband at 502 West Broad Street. We live on the second floor of the Broadway condominium. We have lots of people here from the Broadway tonight. I'm here to express my concern with the proposed rezoning of the properties between the Broadway and Park Avenue. If a 4-story building were to be constructed within 20 feet of our building, it would block the natural light coming into our windows facing north in our living room and bedroom. The rooms would really be dark. In addition, street parking would be problematic unless the new building includes a large enough garage and/or sufficient off-street parking. We already have parking and traffic congestion on Pennsylvania Avenue. I am also concerned about guests visiting our building who are about my age. Will there be parking for them? The city needs to require that all new construction include ample parking. Our condo building has 80 residential apartment units. I would like the Planning Commission to understand that our building is mainly a multi-unit residence along with several commercial enterprises. Being principally a residential building, we have the same concerns as those of you who live in single-family houses, and that is parking congestion, noise, and loss of natural light. Zoning changes should protect us and not subject our apartment units to decreases in market value because of issues permitted under by right zoning. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Barry DeMeo, followed by Richard Bartley.
My name is Barry DeMeo, and I live at the Broadway condominium, 502 West Broad, apartment 201. My issue is that I don't want a building constructed 20 feet from my living room and bedroom windows blocking my natural light. My wife and I discovered a near-perfect apartment unit in Arlington 5 years ago, but decided not to make an offer on it because new construction was planned across the street, even though the sellers assured us that their apartment was only one story higher than the planned new building. Conditions like views and natural light are important to us. I think perhaps us all. Our second floor apartment unit overlooks Lee Street and the Kensington Assisted Living Facility. Specifically, our living and dining rooms overlook the Kensington Garage and 5 large trash dumpsters. That's our view. Our only other wall with windows faces Park Avenue, and the property is currently zoned T1. We are alarmed that the rezoning you are considering, allowing 80% building coverage and a 10-foot setback by right, would result in loss of natural light in our bedroom and living room. We would consider this intolerable. Paul Stoddard, at your October 19th meeting, mentioned the Avant project in Arlington as a model of good zoning. However, it appears that current residents of that neighborhood will have a 60-foot distance between their windows and the Avant building. Please don't lose sight that the building in which I live, the Broadway, is principally a residential building. Zoning changes should protect us and not place our residents in jeopardy of having their apartment units suffer decreases in market value because of issues associated with by right zoning. Thank you.
Richard Bartley, followed by Eleanor Chips.
Richard Bartley. I'm a resident of the Broadway, 502 West Broad. And the issues that I wrote down and thought about and intended to discuss have been covered far more eloquently than I ever could. But I do want to say that I think the idea, the prospect of a row of buildings 50 feet high, covering 80% of their property lots and with minimal setback is horrifying. And it's completely inappropriate and out of place on Park Avenue. I think we need to think about the impact on parking. And specific to the area where I live, Pennsylvania, Lee to the east and west, Park to the north, and Broad to the south. Pennsylvania, between Broad and Park, is out of control. It's an absolute war zone. I know the police are doing the best they can. It's just not enough. With illegal parking and double parking and crazy U-turns to grab a spot when one comes open, and blocking of driveways, active driveways in and out, it's dangerous. It's a quality of life issue. And if these buildings are allowed to be built, a concrete canyon, a row of very tall, very densely packed buildings with parking waivers and exceptions and variances that are routinely given out, it seems, in Falls Church, that is only going to get worse. It's going to swallow up more blocks of Park Avenue with parking congestion. Lee Street is almost as bad as Pennsylvania at times. It can only get worse. So I really urge you to consider the impact on an already untenable, congested parking situation in town. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Eleanor Chips, and then Kathleen Thompson.
Good evening. My name is Eleanor Cripps. I'm an original owner at the Broadway. That means I moved in on the 31st of July, 2004. My condo does not face Park Street, but I know from my past career as a real estate broker that our values, the values of the whole building, would be certainly very negatively concerned about this, or affected by this new zoning. After a 30-year real estate career, I retired to Great Falls because the little city was always known as an oasis of trees and nice buildings and excellent schools. Even so, it was also always known as that its real estate taxes are considerably higher than all the surrounding areas. And speaking of taxes, the Broadway pays to the City of Falls Church over $1 million, more than $1 million per year. Now, if this goes through, and I find it hard to understand that 3% of the city for the T-zone at the moment, would the taxes derived from that would be so important and so desperately needed by the city that it would do that, except that all of us know that these 3% T-zone zones tend to grow, and they grow usually very fast. Anyway, we would hope that if this project were to go through, that we would certainly get a reduction in our taxes. But more important than that is that this lovely city, this little oasis, would really lose its great reputation. And so it's goodbye, little city, and we'd all regret that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathleen Thompson, followed by Fred Thompson.
Good evening, Kathy Thompson with the Broadway. I thank you all for your service, because we know you get to sit here and hear us complain, but we are. Every window of my condo faces the Technology Catalyst International building that faces Park Avenue. Every window. I don't get light from anything else besides whatever's behind me. A lot, of course, that would be rezoned under this proposal. When my husband and I looked at this unit to consider to buy in the Broadway, we were concerned about what could be built behind us. We did our due diligence. My husband phoned the city and learned all about transition lots, and learned that the building that's behind us, the lot behind us, by right, could be built 3 stories high, 40% lot coverage, and 40 feet, not 10 feet, 40 feet from the Broadway's lot. There's some confusion. They think 10 feet, but 40 feet is what by right that lot currently has. We still debated buying, but we decided the city certainly would never make a decision to allow a building built that would undermine the livability of a condo building which the city itself approved. Moreover, we understood under the current rules that if a property owner wants to build something larger as a neighboring property owner, we have the right to express our possible concerns about the building's dimension, the location of the lot, and other issues. I have to personally tell you, I have lost a lot of sleep ever since I learned what the City Council was proposing and has now had its first reading of. It will allow a building, as you know, you've heard it tonight many times, but I want to emphasize a building that's up to 50 feet tall. That is only 4 feet lower than the Broadway, 4 feet lower than the Broadway. 10 feet from our property line with 80% lot coverage. Adoption of this proposal would mean that about as far from here as to that wall, 20 feet, I could be looking at a wall from my living room and every bedroom in my condo. That's about, you guessed, whatever 20 feet is from here, the Broadway's property line, and another 10 feet. So that's 20 feet from my windows. That's what I'd be looking at. Moreover, being on the top 5th floor, I could have all the air conditioning units put on the roof. So I not only have the wall, I could have the air conditioning units and all the noise from the air conditioning units, because there'd be no right for me to comment on the design, the city to affect the design. They could just be right there. Put it in terms, if you walk away, you can't think 20 feet, think of less than 2 car lengths away is how close this building would be. The city has numerous rules to protect single-family residents, such as the setback, but has nothing to protect condos, where we also live 24/7. The city code treats us like we're camping out in a commercial office building. There's absolutely no way would I have ever made the Broadway my home if I thought that there was a zoning code that had put a building 10 feet from our property. I'm begging the Planning Council to recommend to the city that council that does not go forth with this. I want to end by saying we live in Falls Church City, not New York City. So look at that wall, and should I be far enough away from it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Fred Thompson, followed by Will Shorter.
I'm Fred Thompson, likewise in the Broadway. I'm the chairman of the T-Zone Task Force that we put together. There are a few other folks who aren't here today that may be at your next meeting in December 7th to comment as well, because they wanted to voice their opinions. Let me just say a few things. First of all, we talked about Broadway residences. There are actually 37, I'll call them homes, because they are homes for people that face either on the courtyard or on the back of the building. Out of the 80 units, 37 homes are affected directly every single day. The next thing I would say is that I did talk to a city council member this past week who said that the objective was primarily to build $600,000 to $800,000 condos, not affordable housing, not missing middle. And I guess that took me back to look at the examples, and I want to talk a little bit about the examples that have been proposed, because they all are condos. In a way, that makes sense. If that really is the only objective, is to maximize income and to have the biggest condos available, we should take a look at what was presented to us. One thing I would say is that the object of this is supposed to be diversity in housing, but under these rules, no housing, zero housing can be built by right. That seems inconsistent. We're trying to promote diversity of housing, we're trying to promote housing alternatives, and no housing can be built by right? Not even single, not duplex, not affordable housing, not the kind of missing middle type, mild density or short density, nothing, zero. Everything has to go through a special exception process, but then there are 2 special exception processes. One's only 3 months shorter than the other. I'm not sure that's going to make the difference to the builder, that I won't build because it's going to take an extra 3 months of review. I think the full special exception process, which gives the Planning Commission and the public a chance to comment on design, definition of building, et cetera, is critical to this process. And then I'd also say, one question is what's the reputation of the city if it allows a massive building the size of the Broadway to be built 10 feet from the Broadway? Who wants to buy the next condo? What's going to be built behind that? Let me just mention some of the things that I saw. First of all, I've been to all of these sites. Robinson Landing, that's not going to be built here. That's on the Potomac River. It's beautiful. There's $1.5 million condo on the back, 1,400 square feet. That's not missing middle either. Let me just also say that some of these have been done effectively, and Del Rey is an excellent one. It's a 3-story building. The 4th story has been pulled back. You can't even tell from either side of the street it's there. That does not happen by right. That happens when city governments, county governments work with the builder and say, this is how you can build your building to accommodate the neighbors on each side. And in our case, there are neighbors on each side. We're in a residential building. There are residences behind us. We are not opposed to townhouses. We're not opposed to missing middle. We're not opposed to a lot of more high-density building. What we are opposed to is a very, very large building on our doorstep.
Thank you.
Will Shorter, followed by Dr. Judith Katz.
We have Mr. Shorter. Going once, going twice. All right, then we'll move on to, sorry, Mr. Shorter? No, maybe not. The next one was
Dr. Judith Katz.
Dr. Katz.
And then Harvey Bissett.
Yeah, just pull the microphone right down so we can all hear you. Great.
Hi, my name is Judith Katz. My husband Sheldon and I are new to Falls Church. We spent a lot of time searching for a home, and we finally found one that we're delighted with at the Broadway, 502 West Broad Street. Our board of directors ensures that the inside and the courtyard of the building are kept beautifully. But now we find that we have to depend upon the city council to create a real estate transition policy to protect the environment and prevent the congestion outside for us and for future Broadway owners. And therefore, we entrust ourselves to you people. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Harry Bissett, followed by Roseanne Kistler.
I'll try to be very brief. I have one point to make tonight, and that is it boggles my mind that the city government and its various entities are giving away the discretion to determine what kind of buildings are built in Falls Church. I've lived here for 40 years on East Broad Street and now on West Broad Street. We live in the Broadway, and during that period, we've seen the development of Falls Church take place, some good, some bad. I remember when they built the building on the corner of, Lee Highway and Route 7, there were signs up and pictures showing us this beautiful building. And then when it came up, it looked like nothing like it. And I had a friend who was on the planning commission in those days, and I went to him and I said, what the hell happened? Why doesn't this look like the picture? And he said to me, we had nothing to do with it. I subsequently found out that it was built, the actual construction was built by Wright. And what I'm asking tonight is, why aren't you holding on to your discretion to gain positive outcomes when someone wants to build a taller building or a bigger building? Now, you look at the paper here, you're surrendering that discretion. Who are you surrendering it to? Well, they're very, in one of the slips of papers, they were very honest. They said, we want to encourage the builders to build. So what you're doing is you're actually surrendering your discretion to improve quality of life in Falls Church by giving builders a greater range of opportunity to build buildings like the back of Founders Row. All you need to do is drive up Broad Street. If I lived across the street from Founders Row on Park Avenue, I would really be depressed by what I saw on a day-to-day basis. So all I'm asking you to do is think about the implications of what you're doing when you make this decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roseanne Kistler, followed by Lori Dunk.
Hello, I'm Roseanne Kistler. I also live at 502 West Broad Street, which is the Broadway and which is not just a building. It's a community of 80 families, all being affected by whatever happens. I moved here about 17 or so years ago, and I got lucky. My unit is not the largest, but I face the courtyard, and I face Park Avenue. And when I open my front door, I'm looking at 3 floor-to-ceiling windows from my living room and my 2 bedrooms. When I look out this time of year and during the summer, this is what I see. If a building goes up next to me, next to our building, that will be a brick wall. It won't be trees, it won't be anything green because they'll only be 10 feet. and there won't be room for it. I really like living in Falls Church. I came from upstate New York, and I happened to find my unit through a realtor who, as he was showing me units, mentioned the story about the tree next to the shoe manufacturer. And I thought that was wonderful, how they would not let him take down that tree. So the greenery of the city is so nice, and I just hope that it doesn't change the character of the whole place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lori Dunk, followed by Sylvia Mala.
Hello, my name's Lori Dunch, and I live at 211 East Columbia Street, which is a historic home. In 2014, our family moved to our current residence from Lion Village, which is near Clarendon and Arlington. We lived in Lion Village from 2000 to 2014 and saw much of the current build-up. It went from a quaint, historic, family-friendly neighborhood to one with increased police activity, oversized structures, and the destruction of the mature tree canopy. It transitioned from predominantly single-family homes to more rental units with rotating tenants that didn't have a stake in the welfare of the community. The development improved density and tax revenues, but the community element was sacrificed. I do not think that the City of Falls Church should aspire to become the next Clarendon. I disagree with the changing underlying zoning rules for transitional areas and feel that each new development should be considered separately according to its unique characteristics. The proposed elevations, lot coverage, and setbacks would shade and devalue the bordering residential properties. Many of the people are here today. We should not give preference to developers at the cost of current residents. I disagree with the elimination or reducing on-site parking requirements for new developments. Since I live on East Columbia, I can attest firsthand to the lack of available street parking to the south of the T-zones. Jefferson, Lawton, and Cherry Streets all have restricted parking. That leaves East Columbia Street. I can tell you, I do not, or our family does not park on East Columbia because it's too dangerous. Sometimes affordable housing is used to justify these types of situations, and it makes me think about V-Point located at 1210 North Highland Street in Clarendon. This was a church in the middle of a residential area that was converted into a 10-story apartment building. Affordable housing was stated as the rationale behind this unprecedented development. My nanny at the time, who was a single mother, applied for affordable housing. This highlighted a couple things. First, her income was deemed too high to qualify for affordable housing. Second, there was no availability, partly because the volume was filled up with part-time students occupying the building that attended nearby George Mason Law School. Part-time law students were able to qualify for affordable housing. I doubt this was the original intent. Diverse housing options might be a good thing, but it doesn't always turn out the way you expect. And I don't believe it should be done to benefit developers at the cost of residential property owners. In conclusion, I support the current intent of transitional zones. Instead of making wholesale zone changes, I believe more precise development should be allowed so that we can uniquely consider each site and minimize the unintended consequences. By carefully and thoughtfully developing these areas, we can create an environment that we all can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sylvia Mala, followed by Helen Abazi.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Mom. I live at 207 Pennsylvania Avenue. At least one of you was my neighbor, and I do know a couple of you. I couldn't really say it better than Mary Chavez did, so I'm not going to try to repeat a lot of the points that have been made. But I think, first of all, I'm here because a neighbor told me about the meeting, and I know you've made efforts to publicize it. I had no idea, and I live maybe 4 houses above Park. Secondly, I think some of the T-zone areas are not like the others. Washington Street is very different than Park, and I think shouldn't be. So that, to me, argues against combining zones 1 and 2. I think it's very, very important that we do a better job to get housing for our workforce, for teachers, for city staff, for police officers. I don't think a goal of 10% really gets us there, and it's not creative. Just having another block of a large building and have 10% of that for workforce housing, I really think we can do better. And we have to do better. I have close ties to another community. Communities go downhill when they can't provide housing for their essential workers, for people who provide services to all of us. So I really think this needs some serious reevaluation. This is, to me, sounds like business as usual. Big, blocky buildings and not very much workforce housing. And affordable housing, I don't know how you define affordable housing, because the railroad cottages get touted a lot as affordable housing, and I don't think $750,000 was affordable for most people. So there is that. Also, I just wanted to ask people who live in the Park, Lee, and Pennsylvania Avenue areas, including the Broadway, to raise their hands, because I don't think you have a good sense of, it might help you get a sense of who's here, but a lot of people have left at this point. So can you all raise your hands if you're in Park, Lee, and Pennsylvania? Thank you. Okay, so finally, I thank you for giving us the chance to comment, but this feels to me like very much the beginning. And I hope that you all think of it that way, not as you're checking a box to get public comment, because I think a lot of rethinking should happen. Thank you.
Helen Abazi, followed by Jane Scully.
Thank you very much. Actually, we do not live here. We own some property where the tenants have to come from several miles away. There is a young lady who's opened the shop. She comes from Manassas. She has 4 children. She has to close the shop early, and she's predictably not doing too terribly well. What I have to say may not be very popular with the people here who are elderly, who want to live the next few years of their lives looking beyond their property in some pleasant situation. But I grew up and we spend a lot of time still in Europe. And Europe is exactly the place where you see row houses, high rises, and walls that are very close to you. In my Athens apartment, the balcony next door to me is about half there, and across a street is about this long. I don't notice it. People will get used to it very quickly if such a thing happens. For one thing, how many of us spend how much time working, looking outside all day long? Frankly, we have a beautiful house in Alexandria. Most, like 23 out of, 23.59 minutes out of the entire day, we are with closed windows working. We do not see this. It's beautiful to have this advantage. Americans, unfortunately, have laid claim to the land where the older generations leave no space for the young ones. All of the nice people who are here trying to stop this commission should ask themselves, where do the policemen come from who enforce their security? Do they come from Oxon Hill, for example? From Loudoun County, Charles County even? Where do the teachers come from? Where will their children live if they don't inherit their own houses? So these are brave situations because the Not in My Backyard movement is huge in the United States. But I hope that the commission will actually see in many parts of the United States, they're beginning to see that normal people cannot live in the areas where they live. Even I bet some of your staff of Falls Church may live somewhere too far from where they would like to live. I know that in Arlington County, we talk to housing and, to housing staff. They live far away, cannot afford a house, cannot afford into any affordable housing either. So I know it's a hard job, but you all have to take care of the future. You have to take care of the people who are not here. And I am sorry if this is being contrary, if this is being unpopular, but we have to see that the U.S. could become a little bit more like Europe, to where if it's okay if a wall is close to us. It's not the end of the world. Thank you, and sorry.
Thank you.
Jane Scully, followed by Olivia Jeffers.
Good evening. I'm Jane Scully. I live at 321 Forest Drive, and I do not have any property at risk. I do not live in the Broadway. But I have lived in the city for 48 years, and I have cared for it deeply. And so this issue is troubling to me because I see both, pros and cons on all this. But I thought I would just go back a little bit, and you all had referenced the ZOAC study, which I think was a very important study at the time. There is a definition there in which they defined T districts, and it read, a consolidated T district should focus on being a transition that is used to moderate intensity, density, and height. Now I want to read you what the 2002 definition is. Much more wordy, too. The T transitional district is intended to provide for transitions in building heights, intensity of use between commercial districts and residential districts, provide for a variety in building use, including both commercial and residential uses, and add to the diversity of commercial spaces and housing types available throughout the city. That's commercial, 3 times in the buffer zone area. That bothers me a little bit because it seems to give more weight to what we thought we were being buffered from in the residential sections, and more on making the commercial areas more accessible. But do you have to really have 80% coverage? That's twice as much as any other coverage that is laid out in any of the zoning documents for any other kind of building. Do we have to have buildings that tall? And I certainly agree with people that if we don't have any architectural control over this or any kind of control, we're in deep trouble. I think it's all wrong. I think we have certainly got problems in this city. We've got issues we've got to face, but I do not think this is the way to do it. We've broken all our own rules. Think about the impervious surface. None of these T district places ask for any kind of pervious surfaces, which we go to work hard on in terms of the residential area. You are paying a lot more in your taxes if you have impervious surfaces. Well, how about all of that room? There's no trace of trees as buffers, which it seems to me automatically goes with it. And really, I could see going down Broad Street and seeing the business district, and then I could see these transitional districts which have no height restrictions that really matter. They're going to be bigger, can be bigger than the businesses themselves. I think it's a little out of control. I would encourage you, please. It's great to be working on this, great to be thinking about it, and I look forward to seeing what comes from this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Olivia Jeffers, followed by Keith Thurston.
Hello, good evening. I'm Olivia Jeffers. I live at Park Towers in 200 North Maple, and I also own a business at 246 West Broad Street, Karma Yoga. And so from the business owner perspective, one thing I am concerned about is actually raising rents. On the one hand, it's great to have more people in, more customers, but also as the rents go higher, it's already hard enough as it is to make ends meet as a small business owner. And one of the special things that I chose this little city for is because it has a cool vibe. It's a little more chill, it's a little more down to earth. There's a lot of green stuff. So Yeah, I am concerned that if things get like Clarendon and Roslyn, that I wouldn't be able to, I'd have to really start packing students in, and it would really change the vibe of the studio. Like, I got the studio for the space. So that's one thing. I have seen a lot of European cities and cities abroad really close together with like really lovely vibes and energies. One thing I've noticed here is the traffic. I just got back from a trip to India, and the traffic was crazy, and there was a lot of honking, but people were not generally mad at each other. I live at 200 North Maple, and I cannot tell you how many times I'm sitting there and I hear the horn get laid on, and I had somebody like cut me off really, really badly and like just shout at me in the middle of the intersection right in front at Northside Social, and like that, I don't know, something's up. That's all I can say. Affordable housing. I mean, it's tense. I got my condo. I'm 31. I'd love to start a family. I can't afford to have kids. It's really hard. So my parents helped get the condo, but it's one of the last affordable units in Falls Church. Everything else was way outside of the price range that was affordable. So in theory, I love the idea of having affordable housing, but I'm also just nervous that, it's just going to be another one of the West Broad buildings that's $2,000 or $3,000 a month for a one-bedroom. What else? The condo unit that I'm in, Park Towers, is really special, and I'm so glad to be there. I can see trees outside, and I'm also get to be close to my neighbors. On Mondays, I get to play hand and foot with some of my 80-year-old neighbors, and the woman across from me has, I think, 4 children in a 2-bedroom, and anyway, but she gets help with the other kids. I don't know. The older people get to like babysit the kids, and it's a really, really fun experience. So stuff like that I think would be wonderful. And then the other thing is, like, what values are we not accounting for? Like, so the space, the greenery, people really value that. But also there's the vibe, the energy, and like what creative solutions can we come up with so that we can have affordable housing and cool vibe and people are happy and it's green. Thanks.
Thank you.
Keith Thurston, followed by Ruby Nicholas.
Good evening. I'm Keith Thurston at 1015 Birch Street, and I do not live by a T-zone, but I'm speaking on the basis of the future quality of the city overall. I identify with the comments that were made in the Village Society letter that was submitted earlier, and with the comments made earlier by Mr. Jones, Ms. Gardner, Ms. Gross, and Mary Chavez. I think the key issues that are really offensive are the ones on lot coverage of being at 80%, the lack of setbacks, and the heights. That is what is basically turning people against and letting you know that that is not a transition zone when you go against those items. I think the idea of serving the missing middle is really a joke. It's a ruse. There is nothing in this that says that the housing that results from this is going to be at a price that serves the missing middle. Unless you're into rent controls or you're into price controls for the sale of the units, you've done nothing to affect the price of houses that you're seeking. You have the choice to build more condos, which is the ideal thing to do, the missing middle. You have lots of these large buildings, the mega buildings that you're building, where are the condos, where are the missing middle. You're going to make that up in the 10% of the units that are going to appear on these small parcels? I don't think so. That's really kidding yourself. I think the Great Street is a really important thing. People love Park Avenue now because it already is a great street. This code change really, I think, goes in the face and is a violation of the Great Street. You won't have it if you allow this to go through. And if you don't think people will build to the maximum, you're also kidding yourselves. They have to build to the maximums, because what's going to happen when you pass this, as people said, the price of the land is going to float up to the highest level that it forces the developer to go for the maximum build out. They all do. And I would too, if I would buy the land. The owners that live there, zoning is a contract. The people that bought near it depended on that zoning to be true and lasting. The people who owned that property knew what the zoning was when they bought it. The people that are thinking about buying the property also know what the zoning is. They should not be counting on you coming along with the Saturday night miracle of increasing the zoning density on the property that I just bought. I think the Planning Commission over the years has been the body that has looked after the character of the city. Historically, you all are the ones that looked after the quality of life and ensured that what was going in was within the keeping of Falls Church for the future. And I think you can continue to do that. Thank you.
Ruby.
Hi, I'm Ruby McDowell, and I just want to let you know that I was really happy to hear that you are considering transitioning 900 South Washington Street building. It's a dilapidated building. It looks really bad. And there's a place in there that's very detrimental to the health of the women and the children, and that's called an abortion center. And so what it does, it causes a lot of tension between the neighbors and that abortion building. I call it the abortion building. And I go there a lot of times to help women find other alternatives to keeping their babies as opposed to killing their children. So the neighbors, they really don't like us there. There's a lot of tension because they don't like us parking in front of their houses. And even though it's a public parking space, they don't like us there with our signs. And we're there a lot of times, like almost every day. And now that we have this campaign going on, try to get more people and churches out there praying, you know, there's just a lot of tenseness between people passing by us. They're mad at us. They wish we weren't there. And I'm just saying that, I think for a more peaceful environment in Falls Church City, it would be great to transition that building to places where, like these people said, more affordable housing. I think that would be more harmonious to the community. And also, it would also not allow Falls Church to be considered one of the largest abortion killing places here in Northern Virginia. There's only 3 abortion mills, and Falls Church is probably one of the highest killing. So they kill about 2,000 babies there a year, and it's very sad because you see women coming out in ambulances. It's not a happy place, and I'm sure the neighborhood would love to see that place no longer have an abortion center. And also, I'd like to recommend, too, like if you do have an abortion center that wants to move somewhere else, that you do have some sort of conditions on it and have the community, the neighbors, consider if they would like this abortion center a place where they kill babies and hurt women in their neighborhood, because it's just going to disrupt the neighborhood. And I just want to thank you for including 900 South Washington as part of that transition. And I hope you consider transitioning it to a place where there is no more babies being killed there and women being hurt. Thank you very much.
That's all the slips.
Okay. Is there anyone who didn't fill out a slip? I see some hands going up. If you didn't fill out a slip, I guess, I don't see whose hand went up first. Why don't you come up, and then if you could maybe line up behind anyone else who wants to speak, and we'll get the speakers who didn't fill out a slip.
Hi there. First, I want to thank you for taking the time to hear us. My name is Rick Lafredo. I'm speaking on behalf of Steve Donnelly and his family. They're residents of Falls Church over 30 years. He can't be here because he's in the hospital, so I'm speaking on his behalf. There's been a lot of talk about Falls Church and the integrity and particularly the quality of life and the charm of Falls Church. And so our focus really is on the building 900 South Washington Street. Number one, face it, it's really an ugly building, and that doesn't do Falls Church any good. And number two, back to the issue of quality of life. Within that building, there's an abortion center in there, and that's not quality of life. It's the killing of innocent human life. So we beg you to do whatever it takes to move that, change that building, and to remove that, because Falls Church is a great place, and it's better than that. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Richard Hunter. I live at 508 Timber Lane, lived there since 2006. I think when we moved there, it was definitely not an exclusive neighborhood. It's starting to feel more like that, more expensive homes coming up. So I'm concerned about affordable housing, so I like the idea behind this, changing the zoning so you can have more kind of townhouse places, multi-family units. And so, yeah, I'm just a few blocks from the property they mentioned at 900 South Washington Street, and it is a dilapidated building, peeling paint, and there's no trees on the property. I think it's just a big parking lot and an ugly building. And yeah, I always notice there's just been like these broken blinds in one window. It looks like someone had a fight with the blinds, and it's lost. And it's been that way for months and months. Like, I don't know if it's vacant or what. And yeah, it's sad. Also, there's an abortion facility in there. So it would be nice to have a good property there, a good, like homes where people can live, and bakeries sound nice. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Mary Keegan. I live at 7303 Woodley Place since 2001, a long-time resident of this area. I've lived overseas as well, multiple countries, so I can sympathize with some of the comments that have been made today. However, I came in here believing that I was in support of some of this. The idea of affordable housing and maybe beautifying some of the city, taking down buildings such as 900 South Washington would be a good thing for this community. However, I think I was about a minute into this presentation when I realized what one of the other gentlemen said, that this sounds very much like a ruse. The whole idea of affordable housing is a ruse so that we can get more commercial properties, bigger expansion to this community. And I immediately felt that, felt a little bit like George Bailey in, It's a Wonderful Life, where he's about ready to shake hands with Potter. And I thought, wait a minute here. This is not what I want for my community, okay? So yes, we do need affordable housing. We do need little bakeries. We do need beautiful communities. I think there was a property owner here that was just speaking about, small businesses. That's what we want in our community. We want to get rid of the ugly 900 South Washington buildings, and we want to put in bakeries and yoga spas, whatever. But we don't want to give up everything that that everybody has already said about how we're losing control of these properties with what's been proposed, and handing it over to businesses that are going to expand into commercial properties, which we don't even know what those commercial properties are going to be. And it may be nothing even close to an improvement for our little city. I see I have a yellow light, but thank you for listening to us. I think some very, very, very good comments have been made tonight, and I hope that all of you really take it to heart, because we don't want to see our community change in the ways that I think this is proposing. So consider that.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Thomas Patchen. Just to be up front, I live in Herndon, but I've visited Falls Church a lot. I used to work in Falls Church when I was younger. I've always admired the city. It's a beautiful mix with the parks, with the trails, with the different businesses. But lately, I've known it more for unfortunately, the abortion center on 900 South Washington Street. And that, like some other people mentioned, causes a lot of conflict, that many babies are killed there. And so a lot of people try to help women there at the center so that they can get help, so that they can have an opportunity to provide life for their families, to be helped before, unfortunately, choosing death for their families. So unfortunately, a lot of people honk as they drive past facilities, not creating that a good living environment for people who live next to 900 South Washington Street. That's not a great transition area to have that right next to housing. So it'd be great for the transition zoning to not include opportunities for places that perform abortions, which is the killing of an innocent life. If that were to be removed from the zoning for T1, that would be excellent. And I support retail, small businesses, affordable housing, different uses, for that property. And thank you again for your time. I appreciate it. Have a great night.
The face is familiar.
Good evening. Dave Snyder, 116 Great Falls Street in the city of Falls Church. I want to thank each and every member of the Planning Commission for the time that you have spent tonight and you have spent, and each and every one of our citizens. We have literally world-class citizens, and I think you heard a world-class discussion tonight. So good luck. But I do want to say this. There are a number of city council members that have been sitting in the audience, and they've been listening to the citizens and during the course of this hearing that you've been so good to put on and to be so patient to listen to everyone. In my view, the fundamental questions are as follows. Number one, is this the best way to provide for affordable housing? Number two, is this the best treatment of T-zones, recognizing the desire for quality, environment, and also T-zones that continue to function as transition zones, particularly in sensitive, low-density residential neighborhoods. In my view, those are a number of the questions as a property owner, as a citizen, and I know these are exactly the kind of questions that you'll be wrestling with and that we will later on City Council. So let me conclude with where I began. Thank you all so very much. I think you've earned your appointments, to say the least, and all of our citizens have provided all of us with a whole lot to think about best ways forward. So good evening and thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? And I will say, this is not the last opportunity to comment on this. There will be more opportunities when we take this up again in December. As of now, the tentative schedule is December 7th is a work session. There's a tentative public hearing scheduled later in the month on the 21st of December, but subject to change, as we can digest the comments tonight. I will say, just to echo what the last speaker, it was overwhelming to see the turnout on this issue. We've been, wrestling with this in some form or another for several months now, and it goes back longer than that. But, seeing this type of, when we had people come out and we've received letters, but getting this type of turnout and hearing this comment is very helpful. And again, it's a very important part of the process. So we're grateful for everyone who came out. Like I said at the outset, we're not going to be making any decisions tonight or really debating this. I think the point of tonight was to digest the comments. I think you've given us a lot to think about. Speaking for myself, I've taken several pages of notes. Of course, it's all recorded on video for everyone to review, but I really do appreciate people's input tonight. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to say anything, but I think, again, tonight really was more to listen, as we said, and we've certainly done a lot of listening tonight, and we'll have to, again, see where we go from here as far as additional meetings and further revisions to the proposal. But I think someone said at some point, where are we in the process? Is this the end? Is this the beginning? And as I said when we started this in the fall, really, we had heard this once in the spring and kind of took it up again last month. Was that I viewed this as I wanted to have a robust public debate and public input, and I think we've gotten that tonight, and there'll be more opportunity for that as well as we go forward, and I think it will help get a better result, and we'll see where this goes. But there's been a lot for us to digest and think about, and for staff as well, who's working on this project. So thank everyone for coming out. I don't know if my colleagues have anything they want to add, but If not, I think what we'll do is we'll move on and conclude some perfunctory things in our meeting. And like I said, thank you, everyone, and stay tuned for further updates on this and on the city's website, right, Mr. Stoddard? Is that, any updates in advance of the next meeting would be posted in advance on the website, and of course, city staff is available to answer questions in the interim, but again, thank you.
Hey, I did have a couple questions for staff, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Commissioner Teets.
So one, having heard some of the people talk about the properties that are around them, can we get a more comprehensive list of each of these lots, their size, and what is currently on them? Because we've gotten like a general idea, and I've driven past some of them, but, I just think it'd be better if we really list them and what's currently on them. Like, are they being, because some of them have office buildings on them, some of them have homes. I just want to see what's on, and some have homes that are being used as businesses. Because some of my concern too is that we have a lot of commercial uses here for small businesses, and they're, what we're seeing as examples don't replace those, right? And then the other question I had, I was looking at the examples that you guys gave us, like for the city, like it was, what was that document? Example city projects. And I'm looking at, I think one of your examples is the Great Forest Townhomes. And I was like, that doesn't look bad. But then I looked, and the reason that doesn't look bad is because it's only 57% pervious cover. It's not 80%. So I'm not sure that these examples really mean that much. Down at the bottom, you guys had some more kind of sketches one, and the very last one, the 120 North Lee and 609 Park Avenue, that was 87% lot coverage, not 80. So I'd like to see something that's actually within those parameters. And the other question I had is at the last meeting, we asked if under the parameters that you guys are suggesting, have you been able to talk to any builders yet that can actually meet all those requirements? Or because you had suggested that staff would get a chance to do that. So I would really like to hear the a builder's perspective, because I still think it's not totally doable the way we have it laid out anyway.
So I heard sort of three questions, and I'll take them, I guess, in the order they were asked. So first, existing property data. That was a question that was certainly staff heard at your last work session. I may ask Mr. Trainer if you could pull up, I guess, two things I want to highlight. I know you all don't want to, or maybe you do. If you want to have a work session tonight, we're certainly ready for it. Actually, if we could go back if we could go to the staff report. I just want to highlight there are some updated materials since your last work session on this. They're all highlighted in gray. First, in the background section, we did try to highlight the themes, or sort of the items that came up, and try our best as staff to categorize them by theme of sort of discussion topic that came up, the approval process and housing types that were being considered, urban design issues, shop talk for things like building heights and setbacks and lot coverage, affordable housing, as well as how would automobile parking be handled. So those were, at least as staff heard it, that was largely the themes that came out of your last work session and the issues raised by the commission and the questions asked. There were a few more questions in the subsequent table, and then I want to highlight, I think those are all the changes. Oh, I'm sorry. There was also just one other thing to highlight as being in there before I actually get to your questions. I apologize for the delay. On line 133, there were questions from the commission about what does the comprehensive plan and the small area plans have to say about these areas. And so staff did research that with help from our long-range planning branch. And we did include both the future land use map as well as a summary of guidance from the comprehensive plan as well as the small area plans for each of the T-zone clusters. Thank you for letting me digress. To get to your question about the property data, Mr. Trainer, if you could pull up that. And actually, I should probably let you introduce this one since you did all the work to make it
And
happen.
I apologize. I don't know. I didn't see that attachment when I was going through all of them, but that is it's very helpful.
So this is every lot, zone T1 or T2. The fields are RPC, number, address, as best as our data can tell us what the current use is. Some fields are missing, but for the most part, there's general office, church, single family, parking lot. So you do get a good sense of what the use is currently. There's the acreage on there that's a little more specific than the cluster map that you've seen, as well as the land value and building value when applicable, as well as the building year. Each cluster here, every lot is grouped together by cluster, which is labeled in the attachment, so you get a sense of not only what specific lot we're talking about, but where in the city as well. So yeah, if there's further suggestions about how we can further refine the data, we're definitely all ears.
And would it be the, I'm trying to figure out, like, someone had mentioned there are houses on here that are historic. So can you just check and see if any of these homes are historic? I would assume it would be in parcel 7.
We did get that list. One of our staff planners, Cameron Garris, who chairs the Historical Commission, did provide us a list of the properties today. A lot of them are along North Washington Street, and I think there were a few others as well.
Yeah, because I find that very concerning, because that is correct. Like, currently, you can't just take down a historic home. You have to put it on the market. And if we were to change the zoning of a historic home, that would up the price of that property, even though technically we wouldn't want it developed, because by our code, we say we want to keep these historic homes. So, I think that this is part of the problem here, is that there's a lot of different properties in these T-zones, and we're kind of talking about a very, bludgeoning effect on properties that all have different roles that are going on right now. And so I think that, anyway, that's one of my issues, but I appreciate this Excel, and I wish I'd noticed it before, so I'm sorry about that. But I think that was part of it. You had a lot of great things in our package, and I want to make sure that we all saw them.
Sure. Thank you for that. Your second question about the example city project, so that's obviously a list that's evolved and grown over time. So the first listing of the townhouse developments that are along Park Avenue, those were some of the first example projects that staff identified as we were looking at the T-zones, and we were using those as sort of urban design guidance for how some of the higher density residential development has worked along Park Avenue to date in the city. The other projects, the proposed projects, which ultimately weren't approved at the corner of Park and Lee, as well as Broad and Spring, staff brought those forward specifically as examples of things that were too dense. Either the lot coverage was too high, the buildings were too high, they didn't have the appropriate transitions. And so we were presenting those as examples of things people have considered or tried to do, either immediately adjacent to single family or within the T-zones themselves, and flagging those as things that didn't fit. And actually, those were included in part to recommend an avenue for all residential development. One of the things that actually drove these projects to be as big as they were at proposal was the need to include commercial square footage, which generally nets out to zero from a developer's perspective. So the thought for including these was, if you could remove that commercial component from the SE code, then you might provide a pathway for people to do lower height, lower intensity residential development. And then your last question about engaging developers and builders. There was an early round of questions with a variety of developers who do these kinds of smaller infill projects when this first got started in 2021, and it's still on our to-do list to do it while this is out from council's referral.
Thank you very much.
And I should say, I wasn't trying to squash further debate. I mean, we had scheduled 3 hours for the meeting, and I thought we'd used a full 3 hours when I saw the crowd at the beginning, but we kind of plowed through. So we do have 30 or 40 minutes if people want to, provide staff more guidance. I mean, I think that's fine. I mean, I wasn't trying to, forestall that. I mean, I think there were some themes that emerged from the comments. I mean, and I know commissioners have other opinions based on our previous work session about where we want staff to focus their energies on refining this. I mean, I think in order to make the next meeting productive, it probably would be helpful. I mean, if people are prepared to provide staff some additional guidance or not. But I mean, I think that, otherwise we're going to, show up in December, with a draft that, I don't know, may or may not reflect, where we want it to go. So if people want to, can react to some of the comments or just provide other thoughts or feedback to staff, I mean, have at it. Commissioner Fuentes, go
Just a
ahead.
clarifying question. Mr. Trainer, in your presentation, you mentioned that council is looking at parking reform. It's something I didn't quite understand, but can you probably more clarification on what that is? Is that related to this?
I believe that's a separate item. I'm not sure exactly what the scheduling is for that, but I believe that's on the council's work plan. Is something to look at, again, is parking minimums either generally or perhaps on a, specific project use.
Hold on a sec, I'm sorry. I'm not as good with Control F as I thought I was. It is a review of parking requirements for multifamily buildings. I think members of the commission are probably aware, with recent multifamily development, what staff has observed is that parking utilization is much lower than what's required by right. And so what often happens is that there is more parking constructed than people are actually using. And so that's a cost that somebody has to bear. Often it's the apartment renters as the costs are carried into their rents. Or it's an impact to the community if there's less sort of offered involuntary concessions than otherwise could have been because there's construction costs that went into parking. So City Council does have it on their work plan as a mid-year or an out-year item to review those parking standards. I think there's the opportunity to look at them specifically for T-zones as part of this amendment, but there is a larger effort contemplated in the work plan.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Ira.
Make a couple comments. Paul and Jack, I just want to say we asked that you guys do some broad outreach, and I think you accomplished that because this is the most people we've had at a planning commission meeting. And I just want to say that for all the people, I know many people aren't here, but it's important to have your voices heard, and we heard them loud and clearly. We also, I know upcoming, we might have a joint session with City Council on some development. Well, I feel like we have a joint session going on right now because we have a large percent of City Council members who are here. So not only that the people who came out did the planning commissioners hear you, but the majority of the City Council heard you. And I think some of the things that we heard with this proposal is that we are trying to accomplish certain goals, and by doing that, we are impinging on other people's goals. There were a lot of people here tonight who were against this, and there were also a lot of people who were for it. But one of the things we also heard was almost everybody who talked about the affordable housing component said that we're not getting there, that we have such a need for affordable housing in this city that this particular zoning change will not make much of a dent in our affordable housing needs in the city. So I think that we should be thinking about this proposal, and it likely will stimulate greater economic development, but it is unlikely in the way that it's structured to lead to greater numbers of affordable units. So if we are going to go forward, I think it's really important that we pair this with increased funding for affordable housing if we want to make affordable housing happen. We clearly heard from people about what they feel is at stake if we have the by right 80% lot coverage. But what are we going to get out of that? And for me personally, I like equitable development, not just development for development's sake, development that will lead to resources that can provide greater access to this incredible community. Another thing that people said was everyone who lives here loves it here and had the resources to be somewhere else in the region but chose Falls Church. And also I heard a real commitment to affordable housing by almost everybody who spoke. So we have a lot of resources here. We have the potential to have even greater resources and do development. And I just hope that we think about this proposal and others in a way that can maximize development and equitable development and affordable housing. But the way that this is currently structured, we're not going to get much on the affordable housing front.
Thank you, Commissioner Ira. Anybody else? Questions or comments or reactions? Go ahead,
If
Commissioner
we're
Weiss.
doing this, I'm happy to just sort of summarize some of
Sure.
the that stood out for me, some of which I think align with the conversation we had at our last meeting. And first of all, I just want to say it was awesome to see so many people here. I think since I joined the Planning Commission pre-pandemic, the pandemic obviously warped things, but this is by far the most people I've seen, and it was great. I'm glad everybody made time for this. You know, some themes that stood out for me. You know, one size does not fit all. We're a small town, but I really do think we need to tailor what happens in the T-zones and adjust it to both current conditions and our, you know, the deep engagement that this community has had on the small area plans, and I think we can do that. Number two, you know, let's really clarify the goal here, and I think some of those goals have already come out in the small area plans. And I think one of those really important goals is affordable housing, and I certainly align with the views that I heard a lot of support for affordable housing, and I heard a lot of support for environment. I'm going to take all of that at face value and say that this community wants more of it, and the way we're tackling it through this T-zone proposal isn't going to get there, and I agree with that. I also personally believe that just because it won't fully solve the problem doesn't mean we shouldn't do something. I mean, so I'm not willing to let the perfect be the enemy of the good in this situation, but I do think we got a clear call to action, that we can be a little bit bolder in terms of what we allow in the T-zones, how we might achieve affordable, and what happens on a by-right basis. I heard a few people say, you know, why aren't we allowing duplexes, quads, sixplexes on a by-right basis? No, not everybody was saying that, but a lot of people were talking about scale. And so when I think about the comments about the lack of buffer, the scale that should be occurring in a transition zone, and I think about the simultaneous support that we've heard tonight for affordable housing, to me that strikes me as a message that we might want to think about allowing more affordable housing by right, that or more diverse housing in the T-zones, recognizing it's not going to solve the problem, but it might make a difference. It might get us on our way. The procedural note I thought was really an insightful one. And that too says to me that, you know, how do we think about procedure? Procedure costs money. Can we cut the procedure for development that meets our objectives in these areas? And can we tailor what our objectives are in these various neighborhoods, right? Smaller scale, more affordable, more trees. You know, can we allow for more by right development there, but not give up the procedural oversight and community engagement on some of the larger projects if we decide that those do make sense there? But I hear people loud and clear. Let's make sure we don't give up community engagement on that. Really empathetic about current conditions. I live in a single-family home on a street full of single-family homes in an R1 district. I bought my house because it has a huge window that looked out on a massive lot with so many trees. We lived there for 14 years. It was all just cut down. I lost all those trees, and now I have a massive wall right next to me. So I have a lot of empathy, and I also just want to share that happens in single-family districts as well. No judgment of the neighbors. They're lovely people, and I welcome them. And I now look at a wall when I used to have trees. So I have a lot of empathy. I have empathy, and it happens everywhere. So my clear takeaway from I have a lot to digest and reflect, and I really want to think about this, but I think we can be bolder in some spots, and I think we can be more tailored. And I also want to just say I heard loud and clear what people are saying about Park Avenue. If you look at the current conditions on Park Avenue, and that table that you put together was really helpful. Thank you, Mr. Trainer, for doing that. That says to me that Park Avenue, there's just a lot of single-family housing there, current conditions. let's think about tailoring what happens in that area to match better what happens, and not come up with a one-size-fits-all. And I'll stop, but thank you. I thought this was a very helpful session.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Stevens.
Just a couple of comments. Again, I want to thank staff for setting this up with giving us the next meeting, I think December 7th, to have as a work session. So my thought was to kind of digest the things that we heard about tonight, look at all the scribblings that I'm sure all of us have been making over the last couple of weeks, and see if we can't begin to form this in a direction that can help staff put together some kind of a recommendation, which is, I don't know if that was evident to everybody, but we don't have a final vote on the Planning Commission on this. We make a recommendation to City Council, so that's where we're headed. I did want to just echo on the one point, because several of us, I went back and listened to the recording from our last meeting, and I think there were at least 4 of us that made the comment at the last meeting that Park Avenue is a quite different milieu than North Washington Street. So I'm hoping that we can find some positive way, good way to incorporate that thought into the final recommendation that we make. And that's all I thought I would make for tonight. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Commissioner Cumont.
I also just want to thank the public for coming out tonight and speaking to all of us, and all my fellow planning commissioners for their insightful comments. I agree with a lot of what you've all said. I did hear one other thing from the public, which was a desire for earlier public engagement with an issue like this that touches people's lives so closely. So I'm not sure of the best way that we could have done that in this process, but I'd like to ask staff and council maybe to think about that and to take that back to discuss. If we have other issues like this one in the future, I think it would be good to engage the public sooner. I know that's something that can be hard to do, but so thank you for your efforts in that regard, and maybe next time we can get it going even earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I'll just say also before you go, Mr. Stoddard, I mean, just big picture themes, I think it came through loud and clear, and I think I mentioned this at earlier work sessions about treating Park Avenue differently. The starting out with the sort of recommendation about combining T-zones, I don't know, there may have been some reason why that was recommended years ago, but I think, it's just looking at the disparate existing conditions and the character where these zones currently are mapped, I mean, I think it just, it really made it loud, and I think it underscored the need to continue to treat them differently. We're looking, and I also think that, what I heard also, I think, was a lot of confusion about what really is the main objective. What's the primary objective of this change? Is it affordable housing? Is it more different housing types? Is it allowing different uses in those zones than they're there today? I mean, I think, we've debated this before, but I think, I could hear from the public that there's sort of some people aren't sure what are we trying to achieve here. And until we have some consensus on that, I think it's going to be hard to actually to get there because we don't know where we're heading. So, also the process issue. I know the debate about allowing certain things to happen more by right or through a more streamlined process. But on the other hand, what is that going to what are we going to get with that? And are we going to wind up having unintended consequences by short-circuiting the public process? And because we are talking about a relatively small number of properties, really would it be such a huge roadblock to getting a good result by still having it go through a more robust public review process? So that's kind of what I heard, and I think that's as far as where I see this going. I mean, I think I see it heading towards having 2, at least maybe keeping the T1 and T2. So that we can try to tailor things more at a finer level for the Park Avenue versus North Washington versus South Washington. I mean, I think we need to look at all of that. So, anyhow, that's kind of what I heard. And again, I just underscore and echo that how grateful we are to get the public input and community engagement. And maybe there'll be another opportunity. I know we had kind of a timeline to go back to council, but let's see where things go. Maybe there'll be an opportunity as the draft of this continues to evolve to have some type of other, public session, maybe more of like a public open house or some other type of session where people can come and ask questions and get more, and have and provide additional feedback, even outside of like a formal public hearing framework. But we can talk about that. So anyhow, that's kind of my overall take on the evening. And yeah.
Can I make one more quick ask? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, one more quick one. Having listened to all the comments tonight, one of the things that came out for me was, would this actually change property values of some of these lots? And could you check with our tax assessor? So if you currently have a single-family home that's historic, if you had this change, would it actually increase the value of that property? Would it increase the property taxes? Would, all those homes on Park Avenue, would they suddenly find themselves with increased property taxes because the value of their property increased? And because I would hate to see someone have no intention of developing their property, but suddenly they're paying more taxes because of this change. So, and we're talking about North Washington being different from Park Avenue, but there are several historic homes in that North Washington section as well.
Right. Well, that was a valid, you raised that point. I mean,
Yeah.
right, obviously that would be an unintended consequence, would be to lose an historic structure because we inadvertently, allowed that to happen by introducing a use without the proper, check in the system to, have some input in that. So, agreed.
Yeah, and I think that's the double whammy, because we're talking about increasing the usage and decreasing the oversight at the same time. And so does that overbalance one way or another? And so just something to think about.
I think Ms. Teets brings up a really good point. I mean, I would assume if these lots are at 60%, or I don't know exactly know what the number is, but it's 40 or 60% lot coverage, and then it goes to 80% lot coverage, and then the height goes even higher, that once that's passed, instantly that the value of that land is worth more. And so staff could do an analysis of, I mean, we have like what all the value is now of the buildings and the land. Well, then make an estimation, if this plan as proposed came to fruition, what would that do to the property values? You guys can do that. I know you can. So, and I would assume they would all go up.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. So, Mr. Stoddard, you were wanted
Yeah,
to.
we can certainly take that one as an action item and try to get you an answer at your next meeting. I think the things on our to-do list will be obviously to answer the technical questions that came up tonight in terms of the assessment data. The other thing we'll be looking to do, by the schedule, by the draft schedule that's in your report, and actually, Mr. Strainer, if you could go to the staff report, I want to go back to that timing section and. Sort of as was mentioned, right, the goal of the Planning Commission is not to either approve or deny the proposed zoning change, but it is to advise council as they consider it. So the schedule as laid out is to have another work session with the Planning Commission in December, and then really use that work session as a way to prep for your public hearing and recommendations back to council. In terms of staff, using the input from tonight from the public, from the commission, from what was said at previous meetings, I think staff's intent is to use, if we go up to that chart on line 27, right, and a recommendation doesn't have to be simple as yeah, this looks great, or no, this looks terrible. Usually myself, I'm very wordy, so I look for more nuanced recommendations. So I would think that these themes and these specific items, as well as what was raised tonight, would form the basis for that recommendation to council. So as we, which would make it very long, but that's just fine. I think one of the things staff would look at is some of the technical aspects of this. Folks on the commission are probably aware that when council refers out an ordinance for public review, they can, at second reading, adopt that change or anything less than that change. But if some of the things that the commission is contemplating recommending go beyond what the Planning Commission had first suggested, whether that's adding a tree canopy requirement or allowing for reduced parking requirements, that goes beyond what the Planning Commission had advertised out. So it may well be that as staff looks at what the Planning Commission's been discussing, your recommendation to council may be you guys need to do a new first reading because what you referred out may not be, we may not advise moving forward with that or some lesser version of it, that you may need to re-advertise something entirely new.
Right. I mean, yes, then that's a great point. I mean, we're not bound by that necessarily. I mean, it's procedural. There are more procedural steps, and it's up to the council ultimately to make the final decision on that. But yeah, we shouldn't certainly feel bound by that. And that's kind of what I was implying. I mean, I think some of the comments from the commission tonight, I think, are leading in that direction that, the draft that we've received, I think, we're looking to make some significant changes to it potentially, and it might rise to that level, so but yeah.
So we'll probably put a pretty big draft watermark on top of it, but I think we'll probably use this table in the comments to draft something like a motion recommendation back to council, but I don't in any means sort of want to make that seem as if I'm putting words in the mouth of the commission. That's really just to try and collect those thoughts and get you all ready for a vote at your second December meeting.
That sounds like a plan, at least in the near term, and I think we'll look forward to that. You'll be busy in the next few weeks. Hopefully you'll have time for Thanksgiving in there somewhere, and then we'll.
We're going to reschedule that, actually, so that'll also be on your agenda.
But we'll look to pick it up again, at least formally, right at the first December meeting. So, all right. Well, again, this was a long night, but we appreciate everyone's input. We appreciate everyone coming out, and I know, given the attendance tonight, people will stay engaged in the process as it continues to evolve, and there'll be more opportunity to provide your input. So with that, we'll move on real quickly. We have a few remaining items on our agenda, unrelated to the T-zones, to get through. I guess the next thing we have is just under information items, just any planning commissioners' reports they'd like to share. I think we're all tired. So that then puts it back in your court, Mr. Stoddard, for a very brief director's. Oh wait, Mr. Stevens.
I just had a
of course,
quick
Mr.
comment.
Stevens. I was worried for a second. And Mr. Stevens was ill and didn't get to attend any meetings.
I know, well, okay, well, I did attend the EDA meeting last evening, and one of the things that they talked about briefly was the 2-week turnaround period that we have on whatever submission is made on the West Falls project. But it kind of got my attention because the Virginia Tech building is, according to Jim Snyder, is going to be proposed as a net zero building. And it's going to have some very interesting sustainability features to it. So I just thought I should at least pass that along in case of any of you were on the fence of not wanting to participate in that meeting. This certainly got my attention.
And you're referring, right, so everyone saw the invite next Monday to attend Send City Council to hear about that building, so.
That's right.
Yep, so if you can, by all means, I think the only thing is if there are going to be more than 3 of us, or 3 of us or more, they'll need to know, so respond and let Paul and the rest of this, and Mr. Trainer know if you're going to attend the council meeting. I think I said I was a tentative yes to that, Paul, I believe. So.
And I'm a no, because I'm downtown for
Keats was a
meetings.
no.
Yeah, I can't get back
And
in
the others
time.
are, I guess, TBD, but if there's going to be 3 of us, they'll need to advertise it, right, Paul?
I ran straight up to the clerk's office to make sure we were going to properly notice that meeting.
Right.
We are on it.
There you go.
Well,
Otherwise-
she's on it.
Otherwise, we'll have to kick somebody out. Otherwise,
I know
the
enough
third
to ask
person
the
who shows up
question.
has
She
to
knows
get
how to
kicked
do it.
out, and that's not nice. Right. Hide in the back. Okay. So if there are no other commissioner reports, then Mr. Stoddard, go ahead with your brief director's report.
Sure, I'm on a clock here. I don't want to hit the 10:30 mark. So just a couple things to update I'll start with the director's report, but I've got some notes about things I want to do that are off the report. So one, and I'm sorry, we meant to share this with you last week, but I didn't catch it. The city manager and deputy city manager provide a quarterly update to the council on progress made against the council's work plan as well as against the adopted CIP, capital improvement program. The manager's memo as well as staff report to the most recent memo and report are included in your packet. The council work plan, as folks probably know, it's a 2-year effort and sort of a feather in the cap of the commission. The work plan is and has been for several years structured around the comprehensive plan, the overall vision for development of the city going into the year 2040, as well as the core values of the city. Those 8 core values are the organizing principles for the work plan. I had a small hand in that years ago, and I'm glad that it's carried forward. So, but credit to the commission, it's your all's plan. Let's see. One, and I also mentioned this, I think, at our last meeting, but here they are in writing. 2 new hires: Laura Arsenault as a principal planner, as well as Henry Zhang as a principal planner, and they are off and running. Laura is also working half-time in the zoning office. She's handling review of Broad and Washington as that goes through construction. She's also laying the groundwork for, and this is something obviously we'll have to talk to the commission about, the outdoor dining regulations. The relaxed ordinance that allows for more outdoor dining during the pandemic is currently on a 6-month extension, which will expire 6 months after the end of September. October, November, December, January, February. So sometime in March, it's set to expire. So Laura's working on provisions that would make those temporary allowances more permanent. Obviously, she's got a lot of work to do with building safety, fire safety, to make sure that whatever is in there on a more permanent basis is safe and accessible for everybody. Henry is already hard at work as well. He's become our new principal point of contact for all things West Falls related, development of Phase 1. As folks probably saw, he made the presentation for the senior housing building to council's final approval, as well as reviewing the Virginia Tech proposal. So both of them very welcome additions to the city and already hard at work. Two things that I have that also slipped the report this time, but I'm glad other people reminded me to mention them. The East End Small Area Plan, it is included in your correspondence section, the flyer for the second community meeting. It will be held on Saturday, November 19th at the Columbia Baptist Church. It's our usual stomping grounds for small area plan meetings. We find that space to be very flexible. So we like, and the AV equipment is good, and they're very accommodating hosts. I would encourage all commissioners to attend that meeting. That's usually been a great opportunity to engage with the general community as well as with other boards and commissions. There's also a survey that's launched, and you can access that link via the project website, which is listed in the flyer. And then the last thing, just a reminder, although people have already done it, the joint session next Monday to review the HIT proposal for the Converge project at the Virginia Tech site. It is advertised as a joint session with council, planning commission, as well as the school board, since they are, of course, an adjoining property owner. That concludes my director's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Okay, well, there were a few items of correspondence. Oh, on the correspondence?
No, on the item that he
Oh, go
just
ahead.
completed. Real quick, on the work plan, the 2-year work plan.
Yeah.
So I thought this was very good, good report. Also, I think, is it new, the implementation CIP pedestrian and bike projects? That looked to be a new add, which I appreciate that having found its way into the report. I did just want to make a quick comment on the WNOD street crossings project, where it went from a 30% plan that we looked at in 2019, in which case it had a couple of the crossings had raised surfaces, and apparently that has gone to no crossings with raised crossings. And that went from the 30% review that we had to now 100% plan complete. So I think there's a process issue there where there was kind of no public review of any of that until it went to 100% complete inside DPW. So I thought I would just raise that, even though overall I'm really happy with the format and the readability of this report. But that one aspect, it kind of struck me as maybe needing a process review.
Yeah, we had mentioned that last time. Yeah, that news, unfortunately. Right, Mr. Stoddard? I think someone had mentioned that. Come on, picked up on that. Yeah, that unfortunate news. I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, I know you explained it was a stormwater challenge, but it didn't. I don't know what if that was insurmountable. But yeah, it is unfortunate that they weren't able to actually include that part. So. Point well taken. Yeah, I think we need to work on making sure that, when what we see is what we get. But I think, unfortunately, value engineering and other challenges sometimes creep into these things. But this one, yeah, it was kind of a disappointment for anyone who was following that process. Okay, let's see. Just the last few items of correspondence. There was a letter from the library board to the council on the great streets. So we heard, we got copied on that. There was a letter from a neighbor about bike issues, and then the East End Area Plan, which is on November 19th, Saturday the 19th of November. I guess if planning commissioners are if more than 3 of us attend that, well, you're already advertising that, right?
We
Is it-
generally notice that as a
Yeah.
meeting of everyone under the sun.
So people are encouraged to come. If we come, are we going to be like roped into leading like breakout groups?
We're recruiting staff now, and hopefully we won't have to recruit commissioners. I know that was a past issue
I've done
when
that
we were
before.
short-staffed.
I didn't mind it, but I wasn't expecting it. I was like, okay, sure.
Yeah. No, the intent is to have it staffed sufficiently that we don't have to volunteer you.
Yeah.
But obviously, we'll let you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully we get a good turnout. I mean, I don't know if we'll get a turnout like tonight for that part of town, but who knows? Yeah, it was great to see people come out. I mean, I don't know. It's funny because I heard there was one letter in the package that was kind of saying we didn't do enough public outreach or something. Like I don't know. Someone was complaining that I just saw a couple little signs, but I don't know. Clearly the word got out. So whatever you did, it clearly worked.
Well, credit to Jack. He was stuffing envelopes. I mean, he was producing the packet on Thursday late into the night so that he had enough time to send it to himself to post.
I don't remember the last time I've seen that many people
on
here.
Friday,
Even
printing
like-
letters. So
Even like on Founders Row, I don't think we had that many people. Even like Founders Row 1, there were a few meetings where it got pretty crowded, but
Broadway, we had that.
yeah, that's probably right. So, yeah, occasionally it does happen.
Now we gotta.
Usually when it's on a one project like that, not usually on like a, more big picture, zoning.
The
But,
biggest crowd we ever had was Hilton Garden Inn.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was an insane asylum.
So, yeah, I guess every once in a while, sometimes it's hard to predict, you never
And
know.
it turned out not to be dangerous, so that's really good.
Things take on a life of their own sometimes, but this was great. This was great. We appreciate everyone who came out tonight, and it helped me, further, refine where I'm heading on this thing. So that was great. All right, well, it's 10:27. If there's nothing else, I'll officially adjourn the meeting, and see everybody in a few weeks. Or, well, on Monday, but at our meeting, right? On Monday.